They said her hands would fail her when it mattered most, until she made a shot that rewrote the rules of precision marksmanship and exposed a conspiracy 27 years in the making. This story begins not with the impossible shot that would make history, but with the moment Sarah Mitchell first understood that what everyone called her greatest weakness might actually be her most powerful gift. May 2026, the FBI Tactical Command Center sat nestled in a clearing 3 miles outside Glacier National Park, Montana, a temporary fortress of satellite dishes and armored vehicles that had grown into something approaching permanence over 7 months of siege operations. Inside the main briefing tent, fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across tactical maps that showed a single red circle marked Hostile Command at the center of concentric defensive rings. Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old and barely 6 months out of Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, stood before those maps and felt the familiar tingle begin in her fingertips. The tremor started small, almost imperceptible, just a slight vibration that anyone else might attribute to caffeine or cold mountain air. But Sarah knew better. She had lived with these tremors her entire life, watched them grow stronger during moments of stress, felt them threaten to derail everything she had worked to become. And now, standing before Colonel Victoria Brennan in a room full of federal tactical commanders, she felt them intensify as the briefing officer explained exactly why she had been pulled from routine training operations and flown 2,000 miles to this remote corner of Montana. The target's face stared out from the briefing screen with eyes that seemed to recognize something in Sarah even through the pixels. Marcus Drake, age 57, former Army Corps of Engineers officer with a service record that read like a template for the perfect soldier until it stopped abruptly in 1999. 27 years of silence. Then 7 months ago, he had seized control of a Cold War-era bunker complex in Devil's Canyon, transforming it into a fortress that controlled the only road access to Three Rivers Valley. 10,000 civilians cut off from the supplies and medical care, 50 federal agents taken hostage in the initial assault. 2 of those agents already executed, their bodies returned with messages pinned to their uniforms detailing government crimes that went back decades. Colonel Brennan's voice cut through the stale air of the briefing tent with the precision of a surgeon's blade. She was 50 years old, compact and iron-hard, with gray eyes that had seen too many operations turn south and learned to trust only what could be proven. Her call sign, ICE, was not ironic. Sergeant Mitchell, you're being assigned to Sniper Team Alpha for Operation Longshot. Your mission is to provide precision overwatch for federal assault teams and possible high-value target elimination if the opportunity presents. The target is Marcus Drake himself. Intel suggests his removal would cause immediate collapse of hostile operations. Sarah studied the tactical photographs of the bunker complex, her eyes automatically calculating angles and distances the way some people counted heartbeats. The fortress sat on a rocky outcrop 3,520 meters from the nearest concealed firing position. Not quite impossible for modern precision rifles, but close enough that the margin for error existed only in theory. That was when she saw the date on one of Drake's service photographs. 1999. The same year her father's career had ended in public disgrace. The same year 6-year-old Sarah had watched her world crumble. "Ma'am," Sarah heard herself say, "may I review the target's complete service record?" Colonel Brennan's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. "Classified portions are redacted, Sergeant. You'll have access to what's relevant for mission planning." "Understood, ma'am." Sarah's tremors increased fractionally as she studied Drake's face again. Something about the shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders in the old uniform photographs, triggered a memory she could not quite grasp. But what is Drake's stated objective? Why the siege? Brennan exchanged a glance with her intelligence officer before responding. Drake claims he's forcing accountability for a classified operation in 1999 that resulted in civilian casualties and a subsequent cover-up. He's demanding congressional hearings and public release of sealed documents. In exchange, he'll release the hostages unharmed. And the 2 agents he's already killed? Those were what Drake calls proof of seriousness. Both were involved in internal investigations that got shut down. Their deaths were executions, Mitchell. This isn't a hostage negotiation anymore. It's a standoff that ends when Drake is eliminated or surrenders. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. 1999. Classified operation. Cover up. The words aligned too perfectly with fragments of her own history, pieces of a puzzle her father had never been willing to assemble for her. Ma'am, request 24 hours to study terrain and prepare firing solutions before deployment. Brennan studied her for a long moment. You'll have 12 hours, Sergeant. Time is not a luxury we possess. Dismissed. Sarah saluted and turned toward the exit, already feeling the weight of what was coming. But as she pushed through the tent flap into cold Montana morning air, she heard Brennan's voice call after her. Mitchell, one more thing. Sarah turned back. Your qualification scores indicate stress tremors in your shooting hand. Master Sergeant Garrett at Camp Pendleton noted it in his evaluation. Are those tremors going to be a problem at 3,500 meters under combat stress? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah felt 20 pairs of eyes shift toward her, measuring, judging, already writing the after-action report that would explain her failure. No, ma'am, Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain steady even as her right hand trembled against her thigh. They won't be a problem. Brennan held her gaze for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. See that they aren't. Sarah stepped into the mountain morning and breathed deeply, trying to slow the cascade of stress chemicals that made her hand shake. 12 hours. Then she would be inserted into a firing position 3,500 meters from a target her father might have known, might have served with, might have secrets about that would finally explain why James Mitchell had been stripped of his rank and left to decay in an Albuquerque apartment while his daughter grew up trying to prove that the Mitchell name wasn't synonymous with failure. But first, she needed to make a phone call she had been avoiding for 3 years. 22 years earlier, on a brutally hot June morning in 2004, 6-year-old Sarah Mitchell sat in the back seat of her mother's sedan in the visitors' parking lot at Marine Corps Base Quantico, watching through the chain-link fence as her father's life ended. The ceremony was called official, but the crowd was small. Fewer than 20 people assembled in the parade ground that could have held thousands. Sarah pressed her face against the sun-heated glass and watched her father stand at attention in dress blues that still fit perfectly, still showed the creases that spoke of pride and discipline and all the things that made Marines different from everyone else. He had ironed those blues himself that morning, she remembered, standing in their base housing bathroom at 0500 hours with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. She had watched from the doorway, half asleep, as he aligned each crease with a ruler, pressed each ribbon into place with fingers that never wavered. Those same fingers were shaking now. Even from the parking lot, even through the fence and the heat shimmer rising from asphalt, Sarah could see the tremor in her father's hands as they hung at his sides. She did not understand the words being read from the official document. She was 6, but she understood the tone, flat and mechanical, like reading ingredients from a cereal box. She understood that the rows of ribbons on her father's chest, the ones he had tried to explain to her once using her stuffed animals as metaphors, were being cataloged as if they were evidence rather than honors. The Purple Heart was her teddy bear, he had said, because it meant you got hurt protecting your friends. The Bronze Star was her toy eagle, because it meant you were brave when everyone else was scared. The marksmanship badges were the little plastic soldiers, because those were for being so good at your job that you could keep everyone safe. Now a stranger's voice was listing them like items at an auction, as if heroism could be repossessed along with rank and dignity. Colonel James Mitchell, United States Marine Corps, the officer's voice carried across the empty parade ground. You are hereby found guilty of willful disobedience of lawful orders, dereliction of duty resulting in mission failure, and conduct unbecoming an officer. You are sentenced to reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and dismissal from the service. Sarah watched 2 sergeants approach her father. She watched them reach for his shoulders. She watched her father, 48 years old and still carrying himself like the warrior he had been for 26 years, stand perfectly still as they stripped the eagles from his collar, the ribbons from his chest, even the belt from his waist, because it bore the Marine Corps emblem and he was no longer worthy to wear it. He never looked toward the parking lot, never acknowledged that his wife and daughter were watching. But Sarah saw his hands, hanging at his sides, beginning to tremble. A slight shake, almost invisible, like he was cold despite the Virginia heat. Her mother, seated in the driver's seat with the engine running and the air conditioning fighting a losing battle, made a sound between a sob and a gasp. Then she put the car in reverse. Mom, where are we going? Sarah asked. We have to wait for Daddy. Her mother's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. We're going home, Sarah. But what about Daddy? Your father, her mother said in a voice scraped raw, is not our problem anymore. They drove away from Quantico that day, and Sarah never saw her mother again. By the time the divorce papers were filed and custody arrangements finalized, Margaret Mitchell had relocated to Seattle with a new name and a new life that did not include room for the daughter of a disgraced Marine. Sarah learned this years later from a social worker who tried to make it sound less like abandonment. She was not successful. James Mitchell, no longer colonel, no longer entitled to the rank he had earned through 2 decades of exemplary service, moved them to a small apartment in Albuquerque. He took a job as a night shift security guard at a storage facility. He started drinking. Not dramatically, not enough to be dangerous, just enough to blur the edges of whatever memories haunted him. And his hands, those hands that had once been steady enough to qualify expert marksman every year for 26 years, developed a tremor that grew worse whenever Sarah asked about what happened. She learned not to ask. The years between 6 and 18 passed in a kind of gray silence. Sarah attended public school and learned to lie when other kids asked what her father did. She learned that Mitchell was a common enough name that teachers did not automatically connect her to the disgraced officer whose case had been mentioned briefly in military justice publications. She learned that her own hands, so steady and sure when she was calm, would begin to shake whenever she felt the weight of judgment or expectation. By the time she was 15, the tremor was pronounced enough that her high school guidance counselor suggested she might have a neurological condition. Tests showed nothing. Everything is normal, the neurologist said, and Sarah wanted to laugh because nothing about her life had ever been normal. At 17, sitting in that same Albuquerque apartment with college applications spread across a table her father had stopped eating at, Sarah made a decision that she would spend the next decade trying to understand. She joined the Marines. Her father, 59 by then and looking 70, said only 4 words when she told him, "You'll regret this too." But Sarah did not regret it. She loved it. Loved the structure, the clarity, the absolute certainty that if you followed the rules and gave everything you had, the Corps would give back meaning and purpose. She excelled in boot camp, graduated near the top of her class in infantry training, and discovered that she had an almost supernatural gift for marksmanship. Her rifle range instructor, a gunnery sergeant with 3 combat deployments and eyes that missed nothing, pulled her aside after she shot a perfect score for the 3rd consecutive qualification. "Mitchell, you've got a gift. Ever think about Scout Sniper?" Sarah, 20 years old and hungry to prove that excellence could erase a family name's stain, barely hesitated. "Yes, gunnery sergeant. I want to be a sniper." "Then you better be ready to hurt. Scout Sniper School is where good Marines go to find out they're not as good as they thought." He was right. The school was agony. Not physical agony, though there was plenty of that. Endless hours in the prone position, muscles screaming, sweat stinging eyes. California sun beating down on the exposed firing ranges at Camp Pendleton with temperatures that climbed past 100 degrees by midday. What looked like lying down comfortably was actually a carefully calibrated torture that tested every muscle group. Your left arm cramped from supporting the rifle's weight. Your right shoulder ached from maintaining perfect stock weld. Your legs went numb from remaining absolutely motionless. And through it all, you had to keep your breathing controlled, your heart rate steady, your mind clear enough to calculate wind speeds and temperature gradients, and the dozen other variables that separated a perfect shot from a near miss. But the real agony was psychological. It was maintaining perfect calm while someone screamed in your ear that you were too slow, too hesitant, too weak to be a Marine sniper. It was holding your breathing steady when every instinct wanted to panic. It was keeping your hand from shaking when the shot in front of you meant the difference between qualification and failure. Week 4, they lost 8 candidates to stress failures. Week 7, 4 more quit voluntarily. Week 10, Master Sergeant Garrett pulled aside the remaining 29 candidates and told them the truth that separated snipers from every other combat specialty. "You're not training to be shooters," he said. "Any decent Marine can hit a target at 500 meters. You're training to be invisible ghosts who can hold position for days, who can function on 2 hours of sleep in 72 hours, who can make a kill shot while your spotter is bleeding out and enemy patrols are searching for your position. The rifle is just a tool. What we're building here is your mind's ability to override every survival instinct evolution gave you." Sarah struggled, not with the shooting itself. Her scores were consistently excellent, often the best in her class. On the known distance range, she could put 10 rounds through the same hole at 800 meters. Not with the ballistic calculations that defeated so many candidates. She excelled at that too, finding a kind of meditative calm in the pure logic of it. Bullet drop at 1,000 meters with M118 LR ammunition was approximately 28 feet. Wind drift for a 10-mile-per-hour crosswind was roughly 60 inches. Sarah could process these variables faster than most candidates could identify them. She struggled with the tremor. It appeared during the stress evaluations. Week 12, the scenario was designed to simulate combat pressure. Candidates were required to maintain a firing position for 12 hours, while instructors applied increasing levels of psychological stress. Random gunfire nearby, simulated casualty reports over the radio, time pressure, demands for immediate shots without adequate preparation. Master Sergeant Robert Garrett, 54 years old and legendary for turning talented shooters into exceptional snipers, watched Sarah through the evaluation with an expression that shifted from curiosity to concern. She had been holding position for 9 hours, had successfully engaged every target presented, had calculated wind and distance with accuracy that impressed even the veteran instructors. But her hand was shaking, not constantly, just during the peak stress moments, when the instructors screamed contradictory orders, when the timer counted down and she had seconds to make a shot that normally required minutes of preparation. The tremor was barely visible, but at 1,000 meters, barely visible translated to inches of deviation. After the evaluation, Garrett called her into his office. Staff Sergeant Catherine Chen, Sarah's primary instructor and the first woman to graduate Scout Sniper School, was already there. The two of them represented a debate that Sarah could feel without hearing a word. "Mitchell," Garrett said, settling his considerable bulk into a chair that protested under the weight. "Talk to me about your hands." Sarah's pulse quickened. She had been dreading this conversation for months. "Gunnery Sergeant, the tremors are minor. They don't affect my accuracy scores." Garrett tapped a tablet screen, bringing up biometric data from her evaluation. "Your accuracy scores are excellent. Top 5% of candidates we've trained. But these sensors don't lie. During peak stress moments, your shooting hand exhibits micro tremors that average 0.3 millimeters of deviation. At 1,000 meters, that's 3 inches. At 2,000 meters, that's a miss. Sir, with respect, I've been compensating successfully throughout training." Staff Sergeant Chen leaned forward. "Sarah, Garrett isn't questioning your scores. He's questioning what happens in the field when you can't control the stress level, when you're holding position for 18 hours, when enemy counter-snipers are hunting you, when American lives depend on a shot you can't afford to miss." The tremor started then, right on cue, as if Sarah's nervous system wanted to prove the point. She clasped her hands together, trying to hide it, hating the weakness even as she felt it spreading through her fingers. Garrett's expression softened slightly. "My father had essential tremor. Not stress-induced like yours, but constant. Couldn't hold a coffee cup steady by the time he was 60. Doctor said it was genetic, neurological. Nothing he could do about it. I'm not trying to end your career, Mitchell, but I need to know you can handle the pressure when it counts." "I can, sir." Chen pulled up another file on the tablet. "We've been reviewing historical data, familial tremor patterns in military snipers. There's not much research, but what exists suggests that stress-induced tremors can actually indicate heightened sensory awareness. Some researchers think it's the nervous system processing environmental data faster than normal, creating a kind of overload that manifests as physical shake." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. "Are you saying the tremors might not be a weakness?" "I'm saying," Garrett interrupted, "that we don't know. And we don't graduate snipers based on theories. We graduate them based on proven performance. You've got 2 weeks until final qualification. If you can demonstrate control during the stress scenarios, you graduate. If not, you recycle or wash out." Sarah stood, feeling the weight of 2 decades of trying to prove she was not her father's failure pressing down on her shoulders. "I'll be ready, Gunnery Sergeant." After she left, Chen turned to Garrett. "You're really going to fail her if she can't control something that might be genetic?" Garrett stared at the door Sarah had just exited through. "I've been training snipers for 22 years, Kat. Sent them to Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Lost 3 of them. You know what the survivors tell me? They say the difference between coming home and dying isn't skill. It's whether your body betrays you when the moment arrives. Mitchell's got more raw talent than anyone I've seen in a decade. But talent doesn't mean anything if her own nervous system is working against her. So what do you want to do? Garrett pulled up another file, this one marked with classification warnings and dated 1987. I want to know if her tremors are actually the same thing her father had. You've seen James Mitchell's file? Garrett's expression went carefully neutral. I served with him, briefly, 1998. He was the best sniper I ever saw. Absolutely unshakable under pressure. Until he wasn't. Chen waited. There was an incident. Classified. Something about civilian casualties and a refusal to fire. Mitchell took the fall, got drummed out. But before that happened, I saw his medical eval. He had the same stress tremors Sarah shows. Maybe worse. And command was studying it, trying to figure out if it was a vulnerability or something else entirely. Did they figure it out? Garrett closed the file. I don't know. Everything got sealed when Mitchell was discharged. But if Sarah's got the same genetic trait, and if it cost her father his career, then she deserves to know what she's up against. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Sarah's life. She trained alone after hours, pushing herself through stress scenarios that would have broken most candidates. She studied everything she could find about familial tremor, essential tremor, stress responses, anything that might give her an edge. She called her father for the first time in 3 years. He answered on the 6th ring, voice rough with sleep or alcohol or both. Yeah, Dad, it's Sarah. Silence, then I know who it is. I'm at Scout Sniper School. Final qualification in 2 weeks. More silence. She could hear breathing, slow and deliberate, like he was trying to decide whether to hang up or engage. Congratulations, he finally said, the words scraped raw. Dad, I need to ask you something. About your hands. The line went dead. Sarah tried calling her back 4 times. He did not answer. She left a voicemail that tried to explain about the tremors, about the evaluation, about needing to understand if this was something she inherited or something she could control. She never knew if he listened. Final qualification came on a March morning in 2025 when dawn broke cold and clear over Camp Pendleton. 23 candidates remained from the original 47 who had started Scout Sniper School 8 months earlier. Sarah was the only woman. She was also, at 26, one of the youngest. The final evaluation was designed to break concentration. Candidates would hold firing positions for 18 hours, longer than most combat missions lasted. They would engage targets at ranges from 800 to 1,500 meters, distances that required mathematical precision and environmental awareness that went beyond anything taught in basic marksmanship, and all while instructors applied maximum stress. Sleep deprivation from the night before, simulated enemy fire, casualty reports over the radio. Impossible time constraints. Sarah took her position at 0500 hours with her M40A6 rifle, a weapon she had learned to treat as an extension of her own nervous system. The morning was cold enough that her breath condensed in small clouds. She settled into the prone position on a rocky hillside overlooking range 400C, checking her natural point of aim, adjusting her body until the scope's reticle naturally fell on the target zone without muscle tension. Hour 3, target at 1,200 meters. Wind gusting and variable, shifting between 8 and 14 miles per hour from the northwest. Sarah watched the mirage in her spotting scope, the heat shimmer that showed wind direction and approximate speed. Tremors starting but manageable. Controlled breathing, slow trigger press. Shot fired. Impact slightly right of center, still well within qualifying range. Hour 7, target at 1,400 meters. The sun was high now, temperature climbing past 90 degrees, creating thermal currents that would affect bullet trajectory. Instructors screaming contradictory orders through her radio headset. The chaos was intentional, testing her ability to filter signal from noise. Tremors intensifying. She could feel them now, a steady vibration in her shooting hand that made the scope reticle dance. Shot fired. Impact 6 inches left of target center. Still qualifying, but not the perfection she demanded of herself. Hour 12, exhaustion setting in, muscles cramping, target at 1,000 meters, but moving. Tremors synchronized with her heartbeat now, creating a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. She fired between pulses, compensating instinctively for the shake. Perfect center mass hit. Hour 16, the breaking point, target at 1,500 meters, wind shifting every 30 seconds. Instructors had just announced simulated casualty, Her spotter was down. She was alone with a shot that needed to happen in 60 seconds or the evaluation failed. Sarah's hand shook violently. The scope reticle danced across the target. Every technique she had learned to control the tremor failed under the cascade of stress hormones flooding her system. 30 seconds. She stopped fighting. The thought came from nowhere, or perhaps from some deep instinct that had been waiting for this moment. Instead of trying to steady her hand, she let it shake. Instead of forcing calm, she rode the tremor like a wave, feeling it pulse and ebb, finding the rhythm beneath the chaos. The tremor was reading the wind. She realized it suddenly, crystalline clarity cutting through exhaustion. Her hand was shaking in response to micro changes in air pressure, temperature shifts, the invisible currents that her conscious mind could not process fast enough, but her nervous system was registering and responding to in real time. 15 seconds. She aimed not where the target was, but where the tremor told her the bullet would go if she trusted biology over logic. Fired. The rifle's recoil pushed against her shoulder. The bullet flew. 1,500 meters. 2.8 seconds of flight time. Wind drift accounted for not through calculation, but through the unconscious processing of a nervous system that had always been too sensitive, too reactive, too fast. Perfect hit, dead center. Master Sergeant Garrett, watching through the observation scope, said just one word: impossible. Sarah maintained position for the final 2 hours, completed the evaluation with scores that placed her second in the class. When she was finally released, standing upright for the first time in 18 hours, her legs barely holding her, Garrett approached with an expression she could not read. "Mitchell, that last shot, how did you compensate for the wind shift?" "I didn't compensate, Gunnery Sergeant. I just followed where my hand was telling me to aim." Garrett stared at her for a long moment. "Your hand was shaking." "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant." "And you trusted it?" Sarah met his eyes. "I didn't have a choice." 2 days later, she graduated Scout Sniper School. Staff Sergeant Chen presented her with the distinctive hog's tooth insignia that marked a qualified scout sniper, the small brass pig that represented admission to one of the most exclusive communities in military service. The tradition dated back decades, a mark of pride that separated those who could hack the mental warfare of precision shooting from those who could not. Fewer than 300 Marines earned the hog's tooth each year. Sarah was the 18th woman in Marine Corps history to receive one. Garrett shook her hand and said something that would haunt her for the next 14 months. "Mitchell, whatever you figured out during that final evaluation, whatever allowed you to turn your tremor into an advantage, don't lose it, because someday you're going to need it for a shot that matters more than qualification." The ceremony was small, no family attended. Sarah's father did not respond to the invitation she had sent to his last known address in Albuquerque, a single sheet of Marine Corps letterhead with the time and location written in her careful handwriting, hoping that maybe this achievement would be enough to bridge 20 years of silence. She told herself she did not care. Told herself that she had done this for herself, not for him, not to redeem a name he had destroyed. But when the ceremony ended and the other graduates moved off to celebrate with parents and siblings and spouses who had traveled across the country to watch them earn their hog's teeth, Sarah stood alone on the parade ground and felt the weight of absence like a physical thing. But that night, alone in the barracks while the other graduates celebrated at the local bar, while she could hear their laughter drifting through the windows on the cool Pendleton evening breeze, Sarah did something she had been avoiding. She went to the base library, a quiet building that served the education center and stayed open 24 hours because Marines worked around the clock and their need for information did not respect normal business hours. She accessed the military personnel database and used her new security clearance to search for information about her father's discharge. Scout snipers receive secret clearance as part of their training, high enough to access most military records that were not compartmentalized or classified above that level, high enough to see things that the 6-year-old girl watching through a chain-link fence had not been authorized to know. Most of the file was classified, but there were fragments. Medical evaluations from 1987 showing unusual neurological responses to stress, language that danced around something the evaluators clearly did not understand. Subject exhibits paradoxical improvement in accuracy during high-stress scenarios. Neurological assessment recommended. Commendations for marksmanship that used words like uncanny and preternatural and consistently exceptional, the kind of language that evaluation writers rarely used because it sounded too much like hyperbole and not enough like measured professional assessment. Reports from training officers noting that James Mitchell's accuracy actually improved under pressure, that his tremors seemed to correlate with enhanced environmental awareness, that he appeared to process sensory data at a rate significantly faster than his peers. One report from 1991 described him identifying a wind shift 3 seconds before anemometer readings confirmed it, as if his body was detecting atmospheric changes that instruments could not yet register. And then there was a classified medical study from 1993, portions redacted but enough visible to sketch the outline of what researchers had found. Genetic marker identified in subject's neurological profile suggests familial pattern, enhanced proprioceptive feedback during stress responses. Recommend longitudinal study of hereditary transmission, potential applications for advanced marksman selection and training. They had known. The Marine Corps had known that her father's tremors were not a weakness but a genetic advantage, had studied him, had documented the correlation between his stress responses and his supernatural accuracy, and then they had classified it, buried it, and when 1999 came and everything fell apart, they had let him take the fall without ever acknowledging what made him special. And then abruptly, 1999, incident classified, court-martial, discharge, end of record. The gap was like a canyon cut through the middle of a career that had been nothing but excellence for 24 years. For 1999, James Mitchell was the template for what a Marine sniper should be. After 1999, he was stripped of rank and discharged in disgrace, transformed from hero to cautionary tale in the space of a single classified incident that no amount of secret clearance could let her access. But buried in the medical files, one sentence that made Sarah's blood run cold. Subject exhibits familial tremor pattern consistent with hereditary neurological variant. Recommend genetic screening for offspring. Flag for monitoring if subject has children serving in marksmanship specialties. Her father had known the tremors were genetic, had watched Sarah develop them growing up, had seen the same subtle shake in her hands that marked his own, and had never said a word. Had let her struggle through scout sniper school thinking she was defective, thinking the tremors were a personal failure, a weakness she needed to overcome, when he could have told her the truth, could have explained what his own tremors had been, could have taught her what he must have learned in 26 years of service, the techniques he must have developed to turn genetic sensitivity into tactical advantage. Unless he had never learned to control them, unless his discharge had come because, at the crucial moment, his tremors had caused him to fail in some way that ended his career and branded him a disgrace. Unless the genetic gift that made him the best sniper the Marines had seen had also been his downfall when it mattered most. Sarah closed the file and made a promise to herself. Whatever her father had failed to do, whatever shot he had missed or refused or botched in 1999, she would not repeat his mistakes. She would master the tremor, turn it into the weapon Staff Sergeant Chen believed it could be, and prove that the Mitchell name could still mean something in the Marine Corps, prove that genetics were not destiny, that children did not have to inherit their parents' failures along with their DNA. 14 months later, standing in the cold Montana morning outside the FBI Tactical Command Center, with 12 hours to prepare for the most important mission of her life, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number she had not called since that unanswered attempt 2 weeks before graduation. This time her father picked up on the second ring. Sarah, he said, she could hear everything in that single word. Fear, resignation, the bitter knowledge of a man who had been waiting for a call he hoped would never come. Dad, I'm in Montana. I've been assigned to a siege operation. Target is a domestic terrorist named Marcus Drake. I need to know if you served with him. The silence stretched so long, she thought the call had dropped. Then, in a voice scraped raw with old wounds, her father said, "End the call, right now." Dad, I need information. This is important. You think I don't know that it's important? You think I don't know exactly why you're in Montana? His voice rose, trembling with an emotion Sarah could not name. Marcus Drake was my best friend for 15 years, and you need to stay as far away from him as possible. I can't. I've been assigned to provide precision overwatch. If I get the shot, I'm authorized to eliminate him. Her father made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Of course you are. Of course they sent James Mitchell's daughter to kill the man who destroyed his career. The symmetry is almost poetic. Dad, what happened in 1999? What happened? James Mitchell said, his voice going flat and dead. is that Marcus and I learned that the government we served doesn't give a damn about honor or truth or the lives of the people it's supposed to protect. And when we tried to do the right thing, they crushed us both. Marcus lost everything. I lost everything. And now they're going to use my daughter to finish what they started 27 years ago. I'm not a weapon pointed by the government, Sarah said, anger flaring. I'm a Marine doing my job. That's what I thought too, her father replied. Right up until the moment I realized my job was to help cover up the murder of 23 innocent people, including Marcus Drake's 7-year-old daughter. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. What? If you see Marcus, if you get that shot you're preparing for, remember something. The man you're aiming at used to be my brother. And the only thing that separates what I did from what he did is that I was too much of a coward to seek justice. He spent 27 years trying to expose the truth. I spent 27 years drinking myself stupid trying to forget it. Dad, I need you to tell me everything. I need you to refuse the mission. Her father's voice cracked. Please, Sarah, if you've ever trusted me about anything, trust me about this. Marcus Drake is not the enemy. And if you kill him, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you just murdered the most honorable man either of us ever knew. The call ended. Sarah stood in the Montana cold, phone still pressed to her ear, hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. 12 hours until insertion. A shot that command expected her to take if the opportunity presented. A target who might be a terrorist or might be a whistleblower, or might be something more complicated than either label could capture. And a father who, for the first time in 20 years, had begged her for something instead of pushing her away. Sarah looked toward the helicopter landing zone where she would board a transport at 1800 hours. Looked at her hands, trembling in the cold mountain air. Thought about the genetic legacy she carried, the tremors that had cost her father his career and might define her own. And then she did the only thing she knew how to do. She walked to the tactical operations tent, requisitioned the files she would need for mission planning, and began calculating wind speeds and bullet trajectories for a 3,500-meter shot that everyone said was at the absolute limit of what current technology could achieve. Because whatever Marcus Drake was, whatever her father had failed to tell her, whatever conspiracy or cover-up or classified horror show had destroyed 2 men's lives in 1999, Sarah Mitchell was a Marine Scout sniper, and Marines completed their missions. Even when their hands shook, even when the truth waited at the end of a scope reticle, 3,500 meters away, wearing the face of a man her father had once called brother. The helicopter's rotors began their pre-flight sequence as sunset painted the Montana sky in shades of amber and blood. Sarah Mitchell, 27 years old and carrying a legacy she did not fully understand, boarded with her rifle in her trembling hands and the absolute certainty that the next 72 hours would change everything. She did not know that she was right. She did not know that the shot she was preparing to take would become the longest confirmed precision shot in domestic law enforcement history. She did not know that her father's tremors, the genetic curse she had spent her whole life trying to overcome, would prove to be exactly what Master Sergeant Garrett had suspected, a heightened sensitivity that could turn environmental data into superhuman accuracy. And she did not know that Marcus Drake, the man designated as her target, had been waiting 7 months for James Mitchell's daughter to arrive, because some truths could only be revealed through the precision of a bullet fired by hands that knew how to shake at exactly the right moment. The helicopter lifted into twilight. Below, the FBI Tactical Command Center began its evening operations briefing. And 3,500 meters away, in a bunker that had withstood 7 months of siege, Marcus Drake stood at his observation window and looked toward the mountain ridgeline, where he knew Sarah Mitchell would soon take position. He had been James Mitchell's best friend once, had served with him, trusted him, betrayed him when forced to choose between loyalty and survival, had spent 27 years collecting evidence and planning justice and waiting for the moment when the past would finally demand its reckoning. That moment had arrived, and it would be decided by a young woman with her father's eyes and her father's tremors and her father's gift for seeing truth through a scope at impossible distances. The siege of Devil's Canyon, 7 months of stalemate, and political maneuvering and hostage negotiations that went nowhere was about to end. Not with a federal assault or a negotiated surrender, but with a single shot fired by hands that everyone said would fail under pressure. They were wrong. They had always been wrong about the Mitchells. The helicopter descended through midnight darkness toward a landing zone that existed only as GPS coordinates in a patch of relatively flat ground and terrain that did not welcome visitors. Sarah Mitchell pressed her face against the window and watched Montana unfold beneath her in shades of black and deeper black. Mountains rising like broken teeth against a starfield so dense it looked artificial. She had never seen this many stars. Growing up in Albuquerque, the city lights had stolen half the squamoi. Here, 3 miles from the nearest town and 70 miles from anything that could be called civilization, the Milky Way spread overhead like a wound in the fabric of space itself. The crew chief tapped her shoulder and held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes to insertion. Sarah checked her gear one final time with the methodical precision that separated living snipers from dead ones. M40A6 rifle secured in its drag bag, ghillie suit components packed for field assembly, rangefinder, anemometer, kestrel, weather meter, all the instruments that would tell her what the wind was doing and what the bullet would do in response. 72 hours of rations compressed into packages small enough to fit in cargo pockets. Water purification tablets, because the streams up here ran clean enough to drink, but protocol was protocol and dehydration killed you, just as dead as enemy fire. And ammunition, 40 rounds of 338 Lapua Magnum. Each round hand-selected for consistency, each one capable of reaching out past 2 miles if the shooter was good enough and the conditions were right. Her hands were shaking, not much, just enough to make the equipment check take longer than it should have. She told herself it was the helicopter's vibration, the cold air bleeding through the thin skin of the fuselage, the adrenaline that came with insertion into a hot zone. She did not let herself think about her father's voice on the phone, cracking with emotion she had not heard in 20 years. Marcus Drake is not the enemy. The words had been looping through her mind for 12 hours, interfering with mission focus, raising questions that had no place in a sniper's headspace when the shot opportunity might present itself at any moment. The helicopter touched down with a jarring impact that rattled teeth. The crew chief slid the door open and freezing air poured in, carrying the smell of pine and snow and something else. Something sharp and electric that Sarah recognized as her own fear. She grabbed her gear and dropped out into rotor wash that threatened to knock her flat, found her footing on rocky ground, and ran in a crouch toward the tree line where Corporal Eric Palmer was already setting up the rally point with his own rifle and pack. The helicopter lifted off behind them, turbines screaming, and then it was gone, and the silence that replaced it was so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Palmer materialized beside her, his face paint making him look like a woodland ghost, and gestured toward the ridge that would take them to Observation Post Bravo. They had 6 hours to make a 3-hour movement because the approach had to be slow and careful and completely invisible to the enemy observation posts that Colonel Brennan's intelligence section said were scattered throughout these mountains like landmines waiting for pressure. They moved through darkness that predated electricity, that remembered when humans were prey instead of predators. Palmer took point, Sarah followed 10 meters back, and the forest swallowed them both without comment. The first 2 hours passed in silence, broken only by the soft crunch of boots on pine needles and the occasional whisper of wind through branches overhead. Sarah's night vision adapted until she could see well enough to avoid most obstacles, her body settling into the rhythm of tactical movement, slow and controlled, each step placed deliberately, weight transferred gradually, constantly scanning for tripwires or sensors or the thermal signature of an enemy sentry who might be watching this exact approach route. At 0342 hours, Palmer froze and went to one knee. Sarah did the same, bringing her rifle up, scanning through the optic for whatever had triggered his alert. Then she saw it, a thermal glint 300 meters ahead and slightly above their position. Someone smoking a cigarette on what had to be an enemy observation post, the cherry glowing like a beacon in the infrared spectrum. Palmer keyed his radio, voice barely a whisper. Hostile OP at our 10 o'clock, single sentry visible. Recommend detour south. Sarah studied the terrain. A detour would add an hour to their movement and take them through an exposed saddle that surveillance drones might be monitoring. But the direct route meant passing within 200 meters of that sentry, close enough that any noise or scent or simple bad luck could compromise them before they even reached their firing position. Detour approved, she whispered back. take us south. They move like shadows, like suggestions of movement rather than actual Marines, and the hostile sentry never looked their way. By 0520 hours, they reached Observation Post Bravo, a rocky outcrop that some previous reconnaissance team had identified as the only position with clear line of sight to the bunker command center 3,520 meters to the northeast. The sun would rise in 40 minutes. They had that long to establish their hide, camouflage their position, and become invisible enough to survive in a spot where enemy counter-snipers would be actively hunting for them. Palmer set up the spotting scope while Sarah assembled her ghillie suit, the burlap and netting and vegetation that would break up her human outline and make her indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. The work was meditative, familiar, a sequence of actions she had performed so many times in training that her hands moved without conscious thought. Thread local vegetation into the netting. Arrange it to match the natural patterns around the position. Test it from different angles to ensure no unnatural lines or colors would give away the hide. By the time the first gray light touched the eastern horizon, Sarah Mitchell had ceased to exist as a distinct object. She had become part of the landscape, another rock on a hillside covered with rocks, and she would remain that way for as long as the mission required. Through her rifle scope, the bunker command center resolved from darkness like a photograph developing. It sat on a rocky prominence that gave it commanding views of the valley floor and the single road that connected Three Rivers Valley to the outside world. The bunker itself was a Cold War relic, built in the 1960s when the government thought nuclear war was inevitable and prepared accordingly by scattering hardened shelters across strategic locations. Concrete walls 3 feet thick, steel doors that could seal against radiation and chemical weapons, independent power and water systems designed to sustain a small garrison for months without resupply. Marcus Drake had chosen his fortress well. The structure that had been meant to protect Americans from Soviet missiles now protected a domestic terrorist from American justice, or what passed for justice. Sarah's father's words kept intruding, unwelcome guests in her mental space. Marcus was my brother. The only thing that separates what I did from what he did is that I was too much of a coward to seek justice. Palmer's voice pulls her back to the present. Range to primary observation window is 3,520 meters. Wind is calm, 4 miles per hour from the west. Temperature 38 degrees and rising. Barometric pressure holding steady at 30.2 inches. No visible movement in the target area. Sarah recorded the data in her logbook, beginning the environmental profile that she would maintain throughout the operation. Wind at dawn was typically calm, but as the sun heated the valley floor, it would generate thermal currents that could push a bullet 2 feet off course at this range. Temperature affected powder burn rate and muzzle velocity. Barometric pressure changed air density. Every variable had to be tracked, measured, integrated into the firing solution that would determine whether her bullet flew true or missed by inches that translated to feet at 2 miles distance. Colonel Brennan's voice crackled over the encrypted radio net at 0630 hours, bringing the morning operational briefing. All elements, this is Overwatch. Federal assault teams are staged and ready. Sniper Team Alpha, confirm you are in position and have clear line of sight to target area. Alpha is set, Sarah replied. Primary observation window is visible. No current target acquisition, but standing by for opportunity. Copy Alpha. Be advised, hostage negotiation team reports no progress in overnight talks. Subject Drake continues to demand congressional hearings and public release of classified documents related to 1999 incident. He has threatened to execute another hostage if demands are not met within 48 hours. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. 48 hours? 2 days to either take the shot that would end the siege or watch another federal agent die because she had hesitated. The weight of it settled on her shoulders like a physical thing, adding to the discomfort of the prone position, the pressure of the rifle stock against her cheek, the tremor that was starting to build in her shooting hand. Palmer glanced at her, reading the tension in her posture. You good? Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly, deliberately, using the technique that had saved her final qualification at Camp Pendleton. Yeah, I'm good. But she was not good. She was thinking about Marcus Drake as something other than a target, wondering what kind of man her father would call brother. What kind of friendship could survive betrayal in 27 years of silence? The mission required her to see Drake as hostile force, a threat to be eliminated for the greater good. But her father had seen him as something else. and James Mitchell for all his failures and all his bitterness. And all the years he had spent drowning in alcohol and regret was not someone who used the word brother lightly. At 0745 hours, Colonel Brennan arrived at Observation Post Bravo with an armed escort and a tablet computer loaded with intelligence briefings that Sarah's secret clearance had not been high enough to access back at the Tactical Operations Center. The colonel moved like someone who had spent time in the field, low and careful, nothing wasted. She settled into the hide beside Sarah and Palmer and studied the bunker through binoculars before speaking. Mitchell, I need to read you in on some background that might affect your targeting decisions. This is classified, secret, need to know, and it doesn't leave this position, understood? Yes, ma'am. Brennan pulled up files on the tablet and angled it so Sarah could read without compromising their hide position. Marcus Drake, age 57, Army Corps of Engineers, 1987 to 1999. Exemplary service record. 2 deployments to classified locations. Expert in demolitions, fortification design, and defensive engineering. In 1999, he was assigned to a joint task force conducting counter-narcotics operations along the southern border. Details are still sealed, but what we know is that an operation went catastrophically wrong. 23 civilians were killed in an explosion at a suspected cartel facility. Drake was investigated, eventually cleared, but resigned his commission shortly after. Since then, he's been off the grid. No employment records, no tax returns, no digital footprint, until 7 months ago when he surfaced here with 40 followers and enough explosives to level this entire valley. Sarah studied the photograph of Drake from his Army service. He looked younger than 57, lean and hard, with eyes that held the same 1,000-yard stare she had seen in combat veterans who had seen too much and processed too little. What happened to the 23 civilians? Were they cartel members? Brennan's expression went carefully neutral. That's where the classification gets heavy. The official record says they were contractors working at a chemical processing facility the cartels were using to manufacture methamphetamine. The facility was rigged to explode if raided, and it detonated when federal forces breached the perimeter. Drake was part of the team that assessed the facility before the raid. He signed off on the safety protocols. And the unofficial record? Brennan was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to share with a sergeant who would be pulling the trigger if the opportunity presented. The unofficial record, which you did not hear from me, suggests that the facility was not a cartel operation at all, that it was a government research site conducting classified testing on chemical agents, that the contractors killed were American citizens who had no idea what they were actually working on, and that when the truth started to emerge, certain people made certain decisions to bury the evidence and blame the explosion on cartel booby traps. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. And Drake? Where does he fit? Drake was the engineer who assessed the facility's structural integrity. When the site detonated, he initially took the fall, was charged with negligence, failure to identify explosive hazards, professional incompetence. His commanding officer at the time testified that Drake had rushed his assessment and missed obvious warning signs. Drake was facing court-martial and prison time. Then suddenly all charges were dropped, he was allowed to resign quietly, and the entire incident was sealed. Who was his commanding officer? Brennan met Sarah's eyes. Colonel James Mitchell, Marine Corps Scout sniper instructor who was also part of the Joint Task Force. He was the one who testified against Drake. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her father. Her father had testified against Marcus Drake, had been part of the cover-up or the betrayal or whatever the hell 1999 had actually been. No wonder Drake had been waiting for her. No wonder he had left messages saying he would know when James Mitchell's daughter arrived. This was not just about ending a siege. This was about settling accounts that went back to before Sarah was old enough to understand what honor meant. "Ma'am," Sarah heard herself say, voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "Was my father part of the cover-up?" Brennan's expression softened slightly. "That's above my clearance, Sergeant. What I can tell you is that your father was also forced out of the service shortly after testifying. Whatever happened in 1999, it destroyed both men's careers. And now Drake is demanding that the truth finally come out. The hostages he's holding, 12 of them are inspectors general, internal affairs investigators, and oversight officials who have been trying to reopen the 1999 case for years. The other 38 are federal agents who were guarding them when Drake's people grabbed them 7 months ago. So some of the hostages might actually support what Drake is doing. Brennan closed the tablet. I don't speculate about hostage psychology, Mitchell. What I know is that Drake has already executed 2 federal agents to prove he's serious. He's holding 50 people whose families want them back alive. And he's built a fortress that we cannot assault without causing mass casualties on both sides. Which is why you're here. One precision shot if the opportunity presents, and this ends without further bloodshed. And if the shot doesn't present, then we find another way. But be ready, Mitchell, because when that window opens, I need you to take it without hesitation. Regardless of what you think you know about Drake or your father or what happened 27 years ago. Can you do that? Sarah looked through her scope at the bunker 3,520 meters away. At the observation window where Marcus Drake might appear at any moment. At the shot that would either end the siege or haunt her for the rest of her life. Yes, ma'am, I can do that. Brennan studied her for a long moment, clearly evaluating whether to believe her. Then she nodded and prepared to leave the hide. One more thing. We intercepted an encrypted transmission from the bunker last night. It was addressed to you personally. Drake knows you're out here, knows who you are, knows your father. He left a message. The colonel played an audio file on the tablet. Marcus Drake's voice emerged, rough but clear, carrying an accent that spoke of rural America and hard years. Sarah Mitchell, daughter of James Mitchell. I've been waiting for you. Your father and I were brothers once. We served together, trusted each other, betrayed each other when circumstances demanded it. He knows what happened in 1999. He knows why I'm here. And he knows that the shot you're preparing to take will either set the truth free or bury it forever. Choose wisely. You have more of your father in you than you realize, including the tremors that made him the best sniper I ever saw. I'll give you 48 hours to decide what kind of Marine you want to be. The kind who follows orders without question, or the kind who seeks truth regardless of cost. Clock starts now. The recording ended. Sarah's hands were shaking visibly now, tremors that had nothing to do with cold or fatigue, and everything to do with the revelation that Marcus Drake knew about her genetic condition, knew about her father's history, knew things that should have been private medical information locked behind security classifications. How does he know about the tremors? Brennan's expression went grim. We're still investigating how Drake obtained your personal information, but his network includes former military personnel with access to databases they should not have access to. He's been planning this operation for years, Mitchell. Every detail calculated, including getting inside your head. He's not in my head, ma'am. See that he stays out of it. Brennan departed with her security detail, moving low and fast back toward the command center, leaving Sarah and Palmer alone in the hide with 3,520 meters of empty air between them and a target who knew exactly who they were and why they were there. Palmer was quiet for several minutes after the colonel left, giving Sarah space to process what she had learned. Then he spoke, voice carefully neutral. You want to talk about it? Nothing to talk about. Mission is the mission. Except your father testified against our target, and now the target is asking you to question orders. That's not nothing, Sergeant. Sarah kept her eye pressed to the scope, watching the bunker, looking for any hint of movement. My father's choices are his own. They don't affect my ability to do my job. With respect, everyone's choices affect them, especially when those choices involve family. Palmer was right, of course, but acknowledging it meant opening doors that Sarah had spent 20 years keeping locked. Meant examining the possibility that her father had been more than just a failure, had been part of something darker than simple disobedience. Meant questioning whether the career she had built in the Marines was actually redemption or just another chapter in a family tradition of being used by systems that did not care about honor or truth. She changed the subject. What do you know about 1999? Were you even born then? Palmer smiled slightly. Barely. I was 2 years old. But I've heard stories. The 90s were supposed to be peaceful, right? Cold War over, economy booming, nothing but blue skies. Except for the people who actually served, it was a different story. Black operations in places that didn't officially exist. Counter-narcotics missions that looked a lot like small wars. Chemical weapons research that violated every treaty we'd signed. A lot of veterans from that era don't talk about what they did, not because it's classified, because it's shameful. You think Drake is telling the truth about the cover-up? I think, Palmer said carefully, That if the government was willing to destroy your father's career and Drake's career to keep 1999 buried, then yeah, there was probably something worth covering up. The question is whether that makes Drake a terrorist or a whistleblower. Does it matter? Either way, if I get the shot, he dies. Palmer adjusted his spotting scope, tracking a bird that had landed on the bunker's outer wall. It matters if we're about to kill someone who's trying to expose the truth. Marines are supposed to fight for what's right, Sergeant. Sometimes that means following orders. Sometimes it means questioning them. Your father had to make that choice in 1999. Sounds like you might have to make it now. Before Sarah could respond, movement in the bunker caught her attention. A figure appeared at the observation window, backlit by interior lights, visible for perhaps 10 seconds before disappearing back inside. Too brief for identification, too brief for a shot even if she had been cleared to fire. But Palmer got a thermal reading during the exposure. That's him. That's Drake. Height, build, thermal signature, all match the intelligence profile. He was looking directly at our position. Sarah felt her pulse spike. Could he actually see us from that range? Not with optics. But if he's been planning this for years, he knows where the good firing positions are. He knows we're out here somewhere, and he's playing mind games, letting us know that he knows. For the next 6 hours, Sarah maintained her position while the sun tracked across the sky and the temperature climbed into the 50s. Palmer rotated off every 2 hours to rest and hydrate while Sarah kept watch on the bunker, logging environmental data, tracking the few brief glimpses of movement in the observation window, fighting the discomfort of absolute stillness in the prone position. Her back ached, her shoulders screamed. The tremor in her shooting hand gradually intensified until she could see it vibrating against the rifle stock. At 14:30 hours, her encrypted radio came alive with a transmission that should not have been possible. It was on a frequency that only she and Palmer and Colonel Brennan should have known, secured with encryption that would take a supercomputer months to break. But Marcus Drake's voice emerged clear as day, speaking directly to her. Sarah Mitchell, I imagine Colonel Brennan has told you about 1999 by now. The official version, sanitized and classified, designed to make your father and me look like failures or traitors, or whatever narrative serves the current administration's needs. But she didn't tell you the whole truth. She doesn't know it. Very few people do. Sarah keyed her radio to respond, but Palmer grabbed her wrist, shaking his head. Don't engage. He's trying to bait you into revealing our position through signal triangulation. Drake's voice continued, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. Your father and I were assigned to a joint task force in 1999. The mission was to assess a chemical facility on the southern border. We were told it was a cartel operation, told that the contractors working there were complicit in drug manufacturing. Your father went in first, did the reconnaissance, reported that something was wrong. The contractors were American citizens, families. The chemical work they were doing had nothing to do with drugs. It was biological agent research, illegal under international law, completely unauthorized by Congress or any legitimate oversight. Sarah kept her eye on the bunker, watching for Drake to appear at the window, wondering if this whole transmission was a distraction while he moved to a different position. Palmer was right. Engaging would compromise their location. But not engaging meant listening to Drake's version of events without being able to challenge or verify. Drake's voice took on a harder edge. Your father refused to clear the facility for assault, said it needed to be investigated, not raided. His commanding officer overruled him, ordered my team to prepare demolition charges as a contingency in case the raid went bad. I trusted the chain of command, believed that officers knew things enlisted men didn't, that there were larger considerations beyond my understanding. So I rigged the facility with enough C4 to level it, standard tactical procedure for hostile sites. The transmission paused. Sarah heard breathing, heavy and controlled, like someone fighting to maintain composure. When your father's recon turned out to be accurate, when the contractors inside turned out to be innocent Americans working on a project they thought was legitimate medical research, the commanding officer ordered the raid anyway. Thought he could secure the site before anyone got hurt, then make the evidence disappear. But the contractors panicked when armed men breached their perimeter. Someone triggered the fire alarm, which I had rigged to detonate the charges remotely as a failsafe. 23 people died, including my 7-year-old daughter Michelle, who was visiting her grandmother in the housing complex next to the facility. Sarah's breath caught. A daughter. Drake had lost a daughter in the explosion he himself had rigged. The weight of that, the crushing guilt of having caused your own child's death while following orders, was beyond anything Sarah could imagine. Drake's voice cracked. I killed my daughter because I trusted the system. Your father tried to stop it and got crushed by the same system for being right. They forced me to testify that the explosion was your father's fault, that he had rushed his assessment and missed my demolition charges. I testified because they threatened to prosecute me for Michelle's death if I didn't. Your father took a dishonorable discharge because they threatened to hurt you and your mother if he fought the charges. We both sacrificed everything to protect the people we loved, and the government that demanded our sacrifice buried the truth and moved on. The transmission ended. Sarah and Palmer sat in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them like the Montana sky. If Drake was telling the truth, then 1999 had not been a simple failure or act of cowardice. It had been a calculated cover-up of illegal government research that had killed innocent people. And the two men who had tried to do the right thing had been destroyed for it, while the people who ordered the illegal operation went on with their careers. Palmer spoke first. You believe him? Sarah thought about her father's voice on the phone, the emotion she had not heard in 20 years. The warning to stay away from Marcus Drake. I don't know, but it fits with what my father said. That Drake was trying to expose the truth, that the government had made them choose between honor and survival. So what do? Sarah kept watching the bunker. We do our job. We maintain observation, report what we see, and if I get a clear shot and authorization to fire, I take it. Personal feelings don't change the mission. Even if the mission is wrong, the question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. The same question her father had faced in 1999 and that Sarah was facing now. At what point did following orders become complicity? At what point did questioning orders become betrayal? The Marine Corps had taught her that clarity came from the chain of command, that officers made strategic decisions and enlisted Marines executed them. But her father had learned that the chain of command could be corrupted, that strategic decisions could be motivated by politics rather than principle. Before she could formulate a response, Colonel Brennan's voice came over the radio. All elements, this is Overwatch. Intelligence indicates Drake may attempt a breakout within the next 24 hours. Assault teams are moving to blocking positions. Sniper Team Alpha, maintain Overwatch and report any movement in target area. Alpha copies, Sarah responded. We'll maintain observation. The afternoon stretched into evening. The sun tracked west and dropped toward the mountains, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold. Sarah rotated positions within the hide to prevent muscle cramps, ate a protein bar that tasted like cardboard, drank water from her camelback, and tried not to think about her father or Drake or the daughter who had died because someone had rigged a building to explode and someone else had ordered it raided. The tremor in her hand grew worse as the temperature dropped, as fatigue accumulated, as the psychological pressure of knowing that Drake was aware of her presence built like a storm front moving across her nervous system. At 1847 hours, as twilight settled over Devil's Canyon, Sarah's personal phone vibrated in her pack. She had not expected to have cell service this far from civilization, but apparently there was a tower somewhere within range. The caller ID showed a number she recognized. Her father. She glanced at Palmer, who was scanning the bunker through his spotting scope. I need to take this. Palmer nodded without looking away from his optic. Go ahead. I'll maintain watch. Sarah moved to the back of the hide, keeping her voice low. Dad. James Mitchell's voice sounded older than 70, worn by decades of regret. You talked to Drake yet? Not directly, but we intercepted a transmission. He told me about 1999, about your daughter, about the cover-up. Her father was quiet for a moment. Then he's told you more than I ever could, more than I had the courage to tell you myself. Is it true, all of it? Every word. Marcus and I were brothers, Sarah, closer than some people are with their biological siblings. We trusted each other with our lives. And when the moment came to stand together against a system that was using us to bury evidence of its own crimes, I chose to save you instead of defending him. I testified that he had been negligent, that the explosion was his fault, because they told me that if I didn't, they would make your mother's life hell and take you away from both of us. Marcus testified against me because they told him he would go to prison as his daughter's killer if he didn't. We both broke under pressure, both chose survival over honor, and we've both spent 27 years living with that choice. Sarah felt tears trying to form but forced them back. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I was ashamed. Because admitting what I did meant admitting that I was a coward when it mattered most. Because you joined the Marines to redeem the Mitchell name, and I couldn't bear to tell you that there was nothing worth redeeming. But you were trying to protect me. That doesn't make it right, Sarah. I had a choice between protecting you and exposing a crime. I chose you, and 23 people died unavenged. Marcus had the same choice, and his daughter died because of it. We're both guilty of letting evil win because we were more concerned with our own families than with justice. Sarah watched the sun drop below the mountains, darkness spreading across the valley like ink and water. What do you want me to do, Dad? Her father's laugh was bitter. I want you to do what I couldn't. I want you to be the Marine I failed to be, but I don't know what that means anymore. Following orders got 23 people killed. Refusing orders got me destroyed. Marcus is trying to force the truth into the open, and the government wants you to kill him before he succeeds. There's no good choice here, Sarah. Just different ways to fail. I have to go, Sarah said. But Dad, thank you for telling me the truth. I should have told you years ago. Be careful, mija. Marcus is a good man who's been twisted by grief and guilt into something dangerous. And the people giving you orders don't care about truth or justice. They care about containing a scandal. Don't let them use you the way they used us. The call ended. Sarah returned to her position beside Palmer, settled back into the prone, pressed her eye to the scope. The bunker was a dark shape against darker sky now. Windows glowing with interior light. A fortress that held 50 hostages and one man who had spent 27 years preparing to make the government answer for its crimes. Palmer glanced at her. Everything okay? Define okay. Fair point. Any guidance from your father? Just that there are no good choices, only different ways to fail. Palmer was quiet for a moment. That's pretty bleak. Yeah, but it's honest. They maintained watch through the night, rotating every 2 hours, drinking coffee from a thermos that Palmer had somehow smuggled into his pack despite regulations against hot beverages in concealed positions. The coffee was terrible, instant crystals mixed with lukewarm water, but it was warm and caffeinated and gave them something to focus on besides the cold and the darkness and the knowledge that when dawn came, Marcus Drake might appear in that observation window, and Sarah would have to decide whether to take a shot that could end the siege or let him live and see where his version of justice led. At 0234 hours, the bunker's exterior lights came on, flooding the approaches with illumination that would make any assault attempt suicidal. Then Drake's voice came over the encrypted radio again, this time without preamble. Sarah Mitchell. Dawn breaks in 3 hours and 40 minutes. At that time, I will appear at the observation window for exactly 45 seconds. You will have one shot. If you take it and hit me, the siege ends immediately. My people have orders to release hostages and surrender. If you miss, I will execute one hostage for your failure. If you do not shoot at all, I will consider it a sign that you want to hear the whole truth, and I will give you another 24 hours to decide what side of history you want to stand on. Choose carefully. Your father made his choice in 1999. Now you make yours. Palmer stared at Sarah. That's not a mission parameter. That's psychological warfare. Sarah felt her hands begin to shake, tremors intensifying with each heartbeat. 45 seconds, 3,520 meters. A target who knew she was here, who knew about her genetic condition, who had spent 27 years preparing for this moment, and a choice that went far beyond simply pulling a trigger. Her father had testified against Marcus Drake to protect her, had sacrificed his honor and his career and his best friend because he loved his daughter more than he loved truth. Now Drake was asking her to do what her father could not, to choose justice over personal considerations, to risk everything for principles that might get her killed or court-martialed or destroyed the same way her father had been destroyed. She keyed her radio to call Colonel Brennan but hesitated. If she reported Drake's ultimatum, Brennan would order her to take the shot without question, would tell her that hostage lives depended on eliminating the threat, that personal history did not matter, that Marines followed orders, and Sarah would take the shot because that was what Marines did, and Marcus Drake would die. and the truth about 1999 would die with him, and 50 hostages would go home to their families, and Sarah would spend the rest of her life wondering if she had just helped the government bury its crimes one more time. Or she could wait, could let that 45-second window pass without firing, could give Drake his 24 hours and see what truth he had to offer, could risk a hostage's life for the possibility of justice, the same calculus her father had refused to make. Palmer was watching her, waiting for a decision. "Sergeant, what are we doing?" Sarah looked through her scope at the bunker where Marcus Drake waited, where 50 hostages waited, where the ghosts of 23 civilians killed in 1999 waited for someone to finally acknowledge their deaths. She thought about her father's trembling hands, about the genetic legacy that had made him the best sniper the Marines had seen until it made him a failure. She thought about the moment during final qualification when she had stopped fighting the tremor and let it guide her, trusting biology over doctrine, instinct over orders. And she made her choice. "We wait," she said. "We observe. We do not engage until I have more information." This is not a simple target elimination. This is about something bigger than ending a siege. "That's not following orders," Palmer said quietly. "I know. Your father got destroyed for making this same choice." "I know that too." Palmer studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, we wait. But when this goes sideways, and it will go sideways, remember that I tried to talk you out of it." "Fair enough." They settled into their positions and watched the darkness and waited for dawn to break over Devil's Canyon, with the knowledge that when the sun rose and Marcus Drake appeared at that observation window, Sarah Mitchell would either become the Marine her father had been or the Marine he had failed to be. She did not yet know which was which, but she knew that the tremor in her hands was not a weakness. It was her body trying to tell her something that her training had tried to suppress, that some shots were not meant to be taken, that some orders were not meant to be followed, that truth sometimes mattered more than efficiency or career, or the comfortable certainty that came from trusting the chain of command. The minutes crawled past like hours. 3 hours until dawn, 2 hours, 1. Sarah checked and rechecked her rifle, verified her environmental data, calculated and recalculated the firing solution for a 3,520-meter shot that she might not take. Palmer maintained watch through his spotting scope, logging every flicker of movement in the bunker, every change in the thermal signature that might indicate Drake was preparing for his promised appearance. And deep in the bunker, Marcus Drake stood at his observation window and looked toward the ridgeline where he knew Sarah Mitchell was waiting with her father's tremors and her father's choice ahead of her. He had spent 27 years preparing for this moment, collecting evidence and building networks and planning an operation that would force the truth into daylight, even if it cost him his life. 23 people had died in 1999, including his daughter, and the government responsible had never acknowledged their crime, never apologized, never faced justice. Until now. Until a young woman with her father's gift and her father's burden aimed a rifle across 2 miles of Montana wilderness and decided what kind of Marine she wanted to be. Drake did not know what Sarah would choose, but he knew that when dawn broke and he stepped into that observation window, the truth would finally get its moment, one way or another. The sky began to lighten in the east. First light came soft and gray, turning the mountains from black silhouettes to three-dimensional forms. Birds began their morning songs. The temperature dropped to its lowest point just before sunrise, and Sarah's breath condensed in small clouds that she carefully directed away from her scope to avoid fogging the glass. Palmer checked his chronometer. 5 minutes to dawn, he'll appear soon. Sarah settled her breathing into the controlled rhythm that made precision shooting possible. Her hand was shaking badly now, tremors so visible that Palmer could see them without looking away from his scope. But Sarah had learned something during her final qualification that her instructors had never taught. The tremor was not the enemy. Fighting it was the enemy. The tremor was her body's way of processing information faster than conscious thought, of reading wind and temperature and atmospheric pressure through nerve endings that were more sensitive than any instrument. She stopped fighting the shake and let it guide her. Let it sync with her heartbeat and her breathing and the invisible rhythms of the environment. And as the sun touched the horizon and light spilled across Devil's Canyon like water finding its level, Sarah Mitchell pressed her eye to the scope and waited for Marcus Drake to appear. The siege of Devil's Canyon, 7 months of stalemate and political maneuvering and hostage negotiations that had gone nowhere, was about to transform into something else entirely. Not a simple military operation, but a reckoning for crimes committed 27 years ago. And the woman behind the rifle, trembling and uncertain and carrying her father's legacy like a weight that might crush her or make her strong, would decide how that reckoning played out. Dawn broke. The observation window glowed with interior light, and Marcus Drake, 57 years old and carrying 27 years of grief and guilt and determination, stepped into view with his arms spread wide, offering Sarah Mitchell the clearest shot she would ever have. 45 seconds. The clock started now. Sarah Mitchell did not fire. Marcus Drake stood in the observation window 3,520 meters away, with his arms spread wide in a pose that was either surrender or crucifixion, and Sarah kept her finger outside the trigger guard and watched him through the scope, while 45 seconds ticked away like the countdown to Judgment Day. Her training screamed at her to take the shot. Her orders demanded it. Colonel Brennan's voice would be on the radio any second now, asking for confirmation of target elimination, expecting Sarah to have done her job without hesitation or doubt. But her hands were shaking so badly that the scope reticle danced across Drake's chest in erratic patterns that made precision shooting impossible. And somewhere beneath the tremor, beneath the adrenaline and the fear, and the weight of her father's voice telling her that Drake was not the enemy, Sarah felt something else. A clarity that had nothing to do with training or orders. A certainty that pulling this trigger would end more than just a siege. The 45 seconds expired. Drake lowered his arms and stepped back from the window, disappearing into the bunker's interior. Sarah released the breath she had been holding and felt her entire body begin to shake, tremors spreading from her hands to her shoulders to her core until Palmer grabbed her arm to steady her. "You okay?" His voice was tight with concern. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly, deliberately, fighting the cascade of stress chemicals that threatened to overwhelm her nervous system. "I'm okay. I just chose not to take a shot I wasn't certain I could make." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The shot had been there. Drake had given her perfect conditions, perfect exposure, perfect opportunity. She had chosen not to fire for reasons that had nothing to do with confidence or capability, and everything to do with the gnawing suspicion that her father was right, that Marcus Drake was not a terrorist, but a broken man seeking justice for crimes that should never have been buried. Colonel Brennan's voice erupted over the radio 3 seconds later, sharp with anger and confusion. "Alpha, this is Overwatch. We observed target exposure and observation window. Why did you not engage?" Sarah keyed her transmit switch, choosing words carefully. Target exposure was insufficient for guaranteed hit at this range. Wind conditions were variable. Risk of miss was too high given hostage situation. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Sarah began to think Brennan might have switched to a different frequency to coordinate her relief and possible court-martial. Then the colonel's voice returned, measured and cold. "Stand by for visitor. Do not leave your position. Overwatch out." Palmer looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed respect and concern in equal measure. "She's coming up here herself. This is going to get ugly." "I know. Was it worth it?" Refusing the shot, Sarah thought about her father's voice cracking with emotion, about Drake's daughter dying in an explosion her father had rigged, about 23 civilians killed to cover up illegal government research. "I don't know yet. Ask me in 48 hours when we see if Drake keeps his word about not executing hostages." They maintained observation for the next 2 hours, while the sun climbed higher and the temperature rose, and the Montana wilderness around them came alive with birdsong that seemed obscenely cheerful given the circumstances. No further movement from the bunker, no additional transmissions from Drake, just silence and waiting, and the knowledge that Sarah had crossed a line that separated following orders from following conscience. At 0847 hours, Colonel Brennan arrived at Observation Post Bravo with a security detail and an expression that could have etched glass. She dismissed Palmer with a gesture, waited until he was out of earshot, then settled into the hide beside Sarah with the controlled movements of someone actively managing rage. "Sergeant Mitchell, explain to me why Marcus Drake is still breathing." Sarah kept her eye pressed to the scope, maintaining observation discipline, even during what was clearly about to be a professional crucifixion. "Ma'am, as I reported, the shot parameters were not optimal. Wind was gusting, temperature gradients were affecting bullet trajectory, and the risk of a miss at 3,500 meters was unacceptably high." Brennan's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. I've reviewed the environmental data Palmer was logging. Wind was steady at 4 miles per hour. Temperature was stable. Atmospheric conditions were ideal. You had a perfect shot, Mitchell, and you chose not to take it. I want to know why. Sarah finally looked away from the scope, meeting Brennan's eyes with the same steady gaze she had learned from her father before disgrace had taught him to look at the ground instead. Because I'm not convinced that killing Drake is the right tactical decision, ma'am. He's offering information about 1999 that could be relevant to understanding this situation, and he's promised no hostage executions if we give him 24 hours. Brennan's laugh was bitter. You're not convinced. A sergeant with 6 months in the fleet, fresh out of Scout Sniper School, has decided that her tactical assessment overrides the operational commander's orders. Do you have any idea how this sounds? It sounds like my father in 1999, Sarah said quietly, questioning orders that didn't make sense, trying to prevent civilian casualties, getting destroyed for being right. The words hung between them like an accusation. Brennan's expression shifted from anger to something more complex, something that looked almost like understanding mixed with resignation. Your father, Brennan said carefully, was a good Marine who made a decision that cost him everything. But he was also right, Mitchell. The operation in 1999 was dirty from the start. The civilians who died should never have been there. The government research they were working on should never have existed. And the cover-up that followed destroyed good people to protect bad decisions. I know this because I've spent the last 7 months reading every classified file I could access about Devil's Canyon and Marcus Drake and the incident that brought us here. Your father and Drake were victims of a system that valued secrecy over accountability. Then why are we here to kill Drake instead of helping him expose the truth? Because, Brennan said with infinite weariness, the system doesn't care about truth. It cares about stability and continuity and not embarrassing the people currently in power. Drake is holding 50 federal agents hostage. He's already killed 2 of them. Regardless of whether his cause is just, he's committed acts of domestic terrorism that cannot be negotiated away. My orders are to end this siege with minimal additional casualties. Your orders are to take the shot when it presents itself. That's the mission, Sergeant. Personal feelings about justice don't change operational requirements. What if the mission is wrong? Brennan studied Sarah for a long moment, evaluating something that went beyond military competence or shooting skills. Then what are you prepared to do about it? Refuse direct orders? Face court-martial? Throw away your career the same way your father threw away his? Before Sarah could answer, the sound of another helicopter approaching from the south interrupted the conversation. Brennan checked her radio, frowned, then looked at Sarah with an expression that was equal parts surprise and suspicion. Were you expecting someone? No, ma'am. The helicopter landed in a clearing 300 meters from Observation Post Bravo, and 2 figures emerged. Even at distance, even without optics, Sarah recognized one of them immediately. The way he moved, careful but not timid, economical but not military. 70 years old and carrying himself like a man who had once been a warrior and remembered what that meant even if his body no longer cooperated. Her father had come to Montana. The second figure was younger, harder, moving with the fluid economy of someone who still trained daily and knew violence as a familiar language. As they approached the observation post, Sarah realized the younger man was providing security for her father, constantly scanning the terrain, hand never far from the sidearm holstered at his hip. Former military, definitely. Probably hired by her father as protection for a trip into what was technically a federal operations zone without authorization. Colonel Brennan stood and moved to intercept them, hand on her own sidearm, but James Mitchell called out before she could issue a challenge. Colonel Brennan, my name is James Mitchell. I believe you know my daughter. I'm here under civilian authority to consult on a matter of operational relevance. I have documentation from the Department of Defense authorizing my presence. He produced a tablet and handed it to Brennan, who scanned the documents with increasing disbelief. Sarah watched the exchange from her position in the hide, unable to hear the conversation, but reading the body language clearly enough. Her father had somehow gotten official authorization to insert himself into an active federal operation. The strings he must have pulled, the favors he must have called in, the bridges he must have burned to make this happen spoke to a level of determination Sarah had never seen from him. Brennan returned to the hide with James Mitchell following, the security contractor taking up a position at the perimeter. The colonel's expression was carefully neutral, but Sarah could see anger simmering beneath the professional mask. Sergeant Mitchell, your father has been granted temporary consultant status by someone with more authority than I have. He claims he has tactical information relevant to the Drake situation. You have 15 minutes to debrief him. Then we're going to have a very serious conversation about chain of command and operational discipline. Brennan departed with her security detail, leaving Sarah alone with her father for the first time in 3 years. James Mitchell settled into the hide with the care of someone whose body reminded him daily that he was no longer young. And for several seconds, they just looked at each other across a distance that had nothing to do with physical space. Her father looked older than 70. The tremor in his hands was pronounced now, visible even in the neutral position of his arms resting on his knees. His face carried the erosion of decades spent drinking to forget things that should never have happened, etched with lines that spoke of guilt and regret and the particular kind of damage that came from being right when the system demanded you be wrong. But his eyes were clear, sharp, focused in a way Sarah had not seen since childhood, before the discharge, before the drinking, before the slow dissolution of everything that had made James Mitchell a legendary Marine sniper. You didn't take the shot, he said. Statement, not question. No. Why? Because you told me Drake wasn't the enemy. Because his story about 1999 matches yours. Because killing him felt like helping the government bury its crimes one more time. Her father nodded slowly, something like pride flickering across his face. Good. That means you're smarter than I was at your age. When I faced the same choice in 1999, I tried to split the difference. Tried to protect you and your mother while also doing the right thing. Ended up failing at both. You protected me, Sarah said. You took a dishonorable discharge to keep me safe. I took a dishonorable discharge because I was too scared to fight. Too scared of what they would do to you if I exposed their crimes. Marcus was braver than me. He wanted to go public with everything. Wanted to force congressional hearings. Wanted justice for his daughter and the 22 other people who died. I talked him out of it. Convinced him that testifying against each other was the only way to protect what little we had left. And we both spent 27 years knowing that we chose survival over honor. Sarah watched her father's hands shake and understood for the first time that the tremor was not just genetic or stress-induced. It was guilt made physical, shame expressed through nervous system malfunction, the body's way of manifesting what the mind could not process. Dad, why are you really here? James Mitchell looked toward the bunker 3,520 meters away, where Marcus Drake waited with 50 hostages and 27 years of evidence, and the desperate need to make someone acknowledge what had been done. I'm here because you're about to face the same choice I faced in 1999. And I'm here to tell you something I should have told you years ago, something that might help you make a better decision than I did. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather journal, pages yellowed with age, filled with handwriting that Sarah recognized as her father's, despite never having seen his personal notes before. This is my training journal from 1987, the year the Marine Corps discovered that my tremors weren't a weakness, that they were something else entirely. Sarah took the journal with trembling hands, opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The entry was dated June 15, 1987, and the handwriting was younger, more confident, the script of a man who had not yet learned that excellence could be punished as easily as failure. The entry read, "Today, during advanced marksmanship evaluation, Dr. Sarah Chen from the Naval Medical Research Center conducted neurological tests on all Scout sniper candidates. I was flagged for unusual stress response patterns. Dr. Chen explained that my tremors are not essential tremor or any pathological condition. They are a genetic trait she calls hypersensitive proprioception. My nervous system processes environmental data faster than normal, creating micro-adjustments in muscle tension that appear as tremors when I'm under stress. But those tremors are actually my body reading wind shifts, temperature changes, atmospheric pressure variations that instruments cannot detect. Dr. Chen believes this is an evolutionary adaptation that appears rarely in certain bloodlines. She wants to study it further. She thinks it could revolutionize how we select and train snipers." Sarah looked up at her father, mind racing. The Marine Corps knew? They knew the tremors were an advantage? They knew, her father confirmed. Dr. Chen spent 3 years studying me and 2 other Marines with similar traits. She developed training protocols to help us harness the tremors instead of suppressing them, what she called the genetic sensitivity protocol. I was part of the test group. By 1990, I could make shots that shouldn't have been possible, could feel wind changes 3 seconds before they happen, could detect thermal currents that affected bullet trajectory. I became the best sniper the Marines had seen in a generation, not despite the tremors, but because of them. So why did you hide this from me? Because, her father said, voice breaking, when 1999 happened and I refused to fire on what turned out to be civilians, the government buried Dr. Chen's research along with everything else, classified it above top secret, destroyed the training protocols, erased any evidence that the tremors were anything but a disqualifying weakness, and they made sure that any offspring of the test subjects would be flagged as genetically unfit for precision marksmanship roles. I didn't tell you because I thought if the Marines knew you had the same trait, they would never let you near Scout Sniper School. But I made it through anyway. You made it through, her father said with something like wonder, because you're stronger than I ever was. You figured out on your own what took me 3 years of specialized training to learn. During your final qualification, when you stopped fighting the tremor and let it guide you, that was the breakthrough Dr. Chen spent years trying to teach. You did it instinctively. Sarah looked at her hands, watching them shake with the familiar tremor that had defined her entire military career. All this time, I thought I was broken, thought I was carrying your failure in my DNA. You're not broken, Sarah. You're gifted. The tremor is your nervous system processing more sensory data than your conscious mind can handle. When you learn to trust it, to read what your body is telling you instead of fighting it, you can make shots that are impossible for normal snipers. Shots like the one Drake is about to ask you to make. What do you mean? Her father pulled out another document, this one more recent, printed on standard copy paper but marked with classification warnings. I spent the last 7 months calling in every favor I had left from my time in service. Got access to files that should have been destroyed decades ago. This is Marcus Drake's psych evaluation from 6 months before the 1999 incident. He was flagged for the same genetic trait you and I have. Dr. Chen wanted to study him too, but Army protocols prevented cross-service research. Marcus never got the training I did, never learned to control his tremors. But he's had 27 years to figure it out on his own. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as the implications crystallized. You're saying Drake has the same hypersensitivity? That he can read environmental conditions the same way we can? I'm saying that Marcus Drake has spent 27 years preparing for this moment. He's not just waiting for you to take a shot. He's testing whether you inherited the gift, whether you've learned to use it. The 45-second window he gave you this morning was not enough time for a normal sniper to set up and fire. But for someone with our trait, someone who can feel the wind and temperature and atmospheric pressure through their skin, 45 seconds is plenty. Then why didn't I fire? Her father smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him in years. Because you're not ready yet. Because you haven't learned to fully trust the tremor. Because some part of you is still fighting it instead of surrendering to it. I'm here to teach you what Dr. Chen taught me, what I should have taught you years ago when you first showed the signs. I'm here to give you the Mitchell family technique that's been passed down for 3 generations. Sarah blinked. 3 generations? Her father nodded toward the journal, turned to the page marked 1945. Sarah flipped through yellowed pages until she found an entry written in different handwriting, older-style cursive that took effort to decipher. The entry was dated August 20th, 1945, and was written by someone named Raphael Mitchell. Today the war ended. I was in the Pacific for 37 months, 87 confirmed kills, though the real number is higher. The other snipers think I'm lucky or touched by God. But I know the truth. The shaking in my hands is not fear or fatigue. It is my grandfather's gift, passed to my father, now given to me. The old man called it reading the wind through blood, said it came from our ancestors who hunted in the mountains of Spain, who could feel weather changes in their bones and knew when storms were coming before the sky turned dark. In war, this gift kept me alive, kept my brothers alive. The tremor is not weakness. It is the voice of the earth speaking through flesh. Sarah looked up at her father with new understanding. Grandfather Raphael, I never knew he was a sniper. Best in his generation, her father said. Pacific Theater, World War II, 87 confirmed kills across 37 months. He never talked about the war when I was growing up, but he kept journals. After he died in 1976, I found them in his footlocker. He was almost disqualified from marksmanship training because of the tremor. A gunnery sergeant who had served in World War I recognized the trait, pulled strings to get Raphael into scout sniper training. That gunny had served with another Marine who had wind sense, as they called it back then. Sarah felt the weight of that legacy. How many potential snipers had been turned away because evaluators saw weakness instead of strength? Raphael learned to read the tremor the same way you are learning now, her father continued. It discovered that different patterns corresponded to different wind conditions. By the time he reached the Pacific, he could predict weather shifts before they happened. He taught my father, your grandfather, Thomas Mitchell. Army, Korea, 1952. He died before I was born, but left letters explaining the technique. 3 generations of warriors carrying trembling hands, each learning to turn weakness into strength. Now you are the 4th generation. The weight of that legacy settled on Sarah like a physical thing. 3 generations of Mitchell snipers, each carrying trembling hands, each told they were defective, each discovering that the tremor was actually the key to superhuman accuracy. How many had been discouraged from military service because of it? How many had washed out of training because they fought the tremor instead of embracing it? Her father seemed to read her thoughts. The genetic trait is rare. Maybe 1 in 10,000 people have it. Most never know because it only manifests under extreme stress, and most people avoid extreme stress. But for those of us who end up in combat roles, who need precision under pressure, the tremor is the difference between life and death. Not because it makes our hands steady, because it makes us aware. Show me, Sarah said. Teach me the technique. For the next 6 hours, as the sun tracked across the Montana sky and Palmer maintained watch on the bunker, James Mitchell taught his daughter what Dr. Chen had taught him nearly 40 years ago. How to stop fighting the tremor and instead feel it as information. How to recognize that different tremor frequencies corresponded to different environmental conditions. How to use the shaking not as something to overcome, but as a sensor more accurate than any mechanical instrument. The lesson began with breathing, not the controlled breathing Sarah had learned in Scout Sniper School, designed to minimize movement and steady the rifle. This was different, deeper, more natural, allowing the tremor to sync with breath instead of fighting against it. Let the tremor happen, her father instructed. Don't try to suppress it. Just breathe and feel where it takes you. Sarah breathed, slow and deep, and felt the tremor change, not disappearing but shifting in character, becoming less chaotic, more rhythmic, like a wave pattern instead of random noise. Good. Now feel the wind on your face. Don't think about it, just feel it. Let your body register the pressure, the temperature, the moisture in the air. Sarah closed her eyes and felt. The wind was light, maybe 3 miles per hour, coming from the northwest. But beneath that surface reading, she sensed something else. A slight increase in pressure against her right cheek. A temperature differential between her left and right sides. Microcurrents that her conscious mind had never registered, but her nervous system was processing in real time. Your tremor just changed frequency, her father observed. Did you feel it? Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her hands. The tremor had intensified slightly on her right side, decreased on her left. Yes, it shifted. That's your body telling you the wind is stronger on your right. A normal anemometer would read it as steady 3 miles per hour. But your nervous system is detecting a lateral gradient that will affect bullet trajectory. The tremor is making you aware of something instruments miss. They practiced for hours. Sarah lying in prone position, eyes closed, feeling the environment through her skin while her father called out what the instruments were reading and asked her to predict changes before they registered. At first, Sarah was wrong more often than right. Her predictions of wind shifts came 2 seconds too late. Her sense of temperature changes was off by 3 degrees. The correlation between her tremor frequency and actual atmospheric conditions seemed random. But gradually, with her father's patient coaching, patterns began to emerge. Sarah discovered that a high-frequency tremor in her right hand corresponded to wind from the northeast. A low-frequency pulse in her left hand meant temperature was dropping. A synchronized tremor in both hands, matching her heartbeat exactly, indicated stable atmospheric conditions ideal for long-range shooting. Her father guided her through exercises that Dr. Chen had developed in the 1980s. Close your eyes and tell me when the wind shifts direction. Feel the temperature differential between your right and left sides, and tell me which direction thermal currents are moving. Detect the barometric pressure change that will happen in the next 30 seconds based on how your tremor intensity shifts. By noon, Sarah was predicting wind direction changes with 70% accuracy. By 1300 hours, she was sensing temperature shifts before the thermometer registered them. By 1400 hours, her accuracy had climbed to 80%, and her father was watching her with an expression that mixed pride and sadness in equal measure. "You're learning faster than I did," he said. Dr. Chen said the trait strengthens with each generation, as if evolution is selecting for it. "Your grandfather had it. I had it stronger. You have it stronger still. By the time you master this technique, you will be able to make shots that I could only dream about." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her hands, watching the tremor pulse in patterns that now made sense. "It's like learning a new language. The tremor has been speaking to me my whole life, and I just did not know how to listen." "That's exactly right," her father said. Dr. Chen called it proprioceptive language. Your nervous system is constantly receiving environmental data through skin sensors, muscle tension, even the fluid in your inner ear. Normal people process this data unconsciously and slowly. People with our genetic trait process it consciously and rapidly. The tremor is the visible manifestation of your brain working overtime to integrate all that sensory input. He pulled out a notebook and sketched a diagram showing different tremor patterns and their corresponding environmental conditions. This is the shorthand Dr. Chen developed. Fast tremor, high frequency, means rapid environmental change requiring immediate compensation. Slow tremor, low frequency, means stable conditions with predictable bullet trajectory. Synchronized tremor, matching your heartbeat, means you have achieved what she called harmonic resonance with your environment. That's the state you want to be in when you take the shot. Sarah studied the diagram, committing the patterns to memory. "What about when the tremor becomes so intense I can barely hold the rifle steady?" "That happened during my final qualification at Camp Pendleton." Her father smiled. "That's the breakthrough moment. Maximum tremor intensity means your nervous system has detected something critical that your conscious mind has not yet recognized. Could be a sudden wind shift, a thermal inversion, even a change in target movement you perceive subconsciously. When the tremor spikes like that, Dr. Chen taught me to stop, take 3 deep breaths, and ask myself what my body is trying to tell me. 9 times out of 10, if I waited through the spike instead of fighting it, the environmental change would reveal itself and I could compensate." Sarah thought back to that final qualification shot at 1,500 meters. The tremor had spiked so intensely she thought she would fail. But instead of fighting it, she had surrendered to it, let it guide her aim, and made a perfect hit. Her body had detected the wind shift before her conscious mind registered it. "That's what happened at qualification," she said with sudden clarity. "The tremor spiked because it sensed the wind transition. When I stopped fighting and just followed where my hands were pulling, I was actually compensating based on data my nervous system had already processed." "Exactly," her father confirmed. "That was your breakthrough. You discovered instinctively what took me 3 years of training to learn. Now we are just refining the technique, giving you conscious understanding of what you did unconsciously." They worked through increasingly complex scenarios. Sarah in prone position, father manipulating variables by having Palmer create artificial wind currents with a portable fan at different distances, changing the ambient temperature with chemical heat packs placed strategically around the hide, even playing recordings of different sound frequencies to test whether auditory input affected her tremor patterns. It did. Sarah discovered that she could detect Palmer's movement behind her by the way her tremor shifted, as if her nervous system was processing the subtle air pressure changes his body created. She could sense when her father was about to speak by a micro change in tremor frequency that preceded his breath intake. She was becoming aware of her environment in ways that went far beyond normal human perception. By 1,500 hours, she was exhausted but exhilarated. The tremor that had defined her life as a weakness now felt like a superpower, a sixth sense that gave her access to information that other people could not perceive. Her father watched her progress with visible emotion, seeing his daughter master in 6 hours what had taken him years. "One more thing," he said as the lesson entered its final phase. "The technique has limits. When emotional stress becomes too high, when fear or anger or doubt overwhelms your nervous system, The tremor can become noise instead of signal. You start shaking because you are scared, not because you are sensing the environment. Dr. Chen called this the chaos threshold. Every person with our trait has one. Mine was relatively low. Emotional pressure would push me past the point where I could distinguish between tremor as data and tremor as panic. How do I know when I have crossed the threshold? Her father pointed to his own hands, shaking badly now despite the calm conditions and low-stress environment. When the tremor stops being rhythmic and starts being random. When you cannot correlate the shake to any environmental variable. When it feels like your body is working against you instead of with you. That's when you know emotional interference has corrupted the signal. At that point, you have to step back, regulate your emotional state, and wait for the nervous system to recalibrate. Sarah thought about the tremor she had experienced that morning when Drake appeared in the observation window. It had been intense but rhythmic, pulsing in patterns that she now recognized as environmental awareness rather than fear. She had been processing the wind, the temperature, the distance, even Drake's posture through the scope. The tremor had been trying to give her the firing solution, but she had not yet learned to read it. Tomorrow morning, when Drake appears again, I will be ready, Sarah said with quiet confidence. Her father's expression turned serious. Tomorrow morning, Marcus is going to test you with a shot that is designed to be impossible for normal snipers. I don't know the exact parameters, but I know Marcus well enough to predict his thinking. He will create conditions that require you to trust the tremor completely, to ignore your instruments and training, and rely entirely on what your body tells you. If you succeed, you prove that you have mastered the technique. If you fail, people die. Sarah thought about that. A genetic legacy of trembling hands that could read the wind like prophets reading omens. How many Mitchell children had been discouraged from following family tradition because of it? How many potential snipers had been turned away from service because doctors saw pathology where they should have seen adaptation? Her father seemed to follow her thoughts again. The Marine Corps buried Dr. Chen's research because it challenged their assumptions about what makes a good sniper. They want steady hands and calm nerves and robotic precision. But the best snipers throughout history have been the ones who could feel their environment, who could make intuitive adjustments that went beyond calculation. The tremor is not a bug in our genetics. It is a feature. A harsh buzz from the encrypted radio interrupted the lesson. Colonel Brennan's voice emerged, clipped and urgent. All elements, this is Overwatch. We have intercepted communications from the bunker indicating possible hostage execution within the next 2 hours, unless Sniper Team Alpha confirms willingness to receive additional information about 1999 incident. Sergeant Mitchell, respond. Sarah keyed her transmit switch. Alpha copies. What information is Drake offering? Brennan's voice carried barely controlled anger. He claims to have documentary evidence of government crimes including illegal biological weapons research, civilian casualties, and systematic cover-up extending to current administration officials. He wants to transmit files to you personally, bypassing official channels. Intelligence assessment is that this is a delaying tactic designed to prevent you from taking the shot when he next exposes himself. Or Sarah thought but did not say, it is exactly what Drake has been promising them all along. Evidence that could expose the truth about 1999 and force accountability for 23 deaths that have gone unanswered for 27 years. Sarah thought about the shot she had not taken that morning, about the tremor in her hands that was actually enhanced sensory awareness, about 3 generations of Mitchell snipers who had been told they were defective when they were actually gifted, about Marcus Drake standing in an observation window with his arms spread wide, waiting for James Mitchell's daughter to prove she had inherited her father's gift along with his conscience. Colonel Brennan, Sarah said into the radio, I am willing to receive Drake's transmission. Forward it to my position. Negative, Sergeant. Intelligence protocols prohibit direct communication with hostile forces. Ma'am, with respect, if Drake has evidence of government crimes, that information is relevant to understanding the tactical situation. Request permission to review materials before making engagement decision. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Sarah began to think Brennan had gone off frequency to coordinate her immediate relief from duty. Then the colonel's voice returned, tight with suppressed fury. You are relieving yourself of this mission, Mitchell. You are too personally compromised to maintain operational objectivity. Prepare to be extracted within the hour. Alternative sniper team is being positioned to assume Overwatch responsibility. Sarah felt her pulse spike. Alternative team meant someone without personal connection to the situation, someone who would take the shot without hesitation when Drake next appeared, someone who would end the siege efficiently and bury the truth permanently under the category of justified tactical decision. Her father's hand tightened on her arm. Once they pull you out, this is over. Drake gets killed by a sniper who does not know the whole story. The hostages go home, and 1999 stays buried. You will spend the rest of your life wondering if you just helped the government win one more time. What do I do? Her father smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had finally found something worth the risk. You do what I should have done 27 years ago. You refuse extraction. You maintain your position. You receive Drake's transmission and evaluate the evidence. And if it proves what I think it proves, you help him expose the truth regardless of what it costs you. That's mutiny. That's integrity. There is a difference. Sarah looked at Palmer, who had been monitoring the conversation with the increasing alarm. Corporal, if I refuse extractions and orders, you will be required to report it. Your career could be damaged by association. Palmer studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Sergeant, my radio appears to be malfunctioning. I cannot hear any extraction orders. Must be atmospheric interference. Happens a lot in these mountains. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a weight lifting that she had not known she was carrying. She keyed her radio one final time, knowing that the next words would either end her career or start something that could not be stopped. Overwatch, this is Alpha. I am declining extraction at this time. Request is denied. I will maintain Overwatch position and receive target's transmission. My assessment is that tactical intelligence outweighs chain of command considerations in this instance. Alpha out. She switched off the radio before Brennan could respond. Her father let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for 27 years. Okay, now we wait for Drake's response, and we prepare for what comes next. What comes next? James Mitchell looked toward the bunker where his best friend waited with evidence and hostages and 27 years of determination. What comes next is that Marcus is going to offer you a deal. He is going to appear at that observation window again, and this time he is going to give you a shot that is technically impossible. A shot that only someone with our genetic trait could make. A shot designed to test whether you have truly learned to trust the tremor. And if I make the shot, then you prove that the Mitchell bloodline still produces warriors worthy of the name. And Marcus surrenders because he will know that at least one person in this operation understands what really happened in 1999. And if I miss, her father's expression went grave. Then people die, maybe a hostage, maybe Marcus, maybe you when Colonel Brennan decides you are too much of a liability to leave in position. There is no safe choice here, Sarah. Only the choice to be complicit in cover-up or complicit in truth. I chose cover-up in 1999, and it destroyed me. You get to choose differently. The encrypted radio crackled to life despite being switched off, and Marcus Drake's voice emerged with the calm certainty of a man who had spent decades preparing for this exact moment. Sarah Mitchell, daughter of James Mitchell, inheritor of the tremor that makes your bloodline special. I am transmitting files now. Review them, share them with your father. Ask him if I am lying about 1999. You have 18 hours to decide what kind of Marine you want to be. At dawn tomorrow, I will appear at the observation window again. But this time, the shot will be different. I am going to test whether you have your father's gift or just his name. Prepare accordingly. The transmission ended. Sarah's tablet began downloading encrypted files, gigabytes of documents and testimony, and evidence that Drake had collected over 27 years. Her father leaned over to watch, and as the first document opened, revealing classified research reports about illegal biological weapons testing, his hands began to shake so badly that he had to clasp them together. It's all here, he whispered. Everything they buried. Everything I was too scared to fight for. Sarah, if you release this, if you make it public, you will destroy your career the same way I destroyed mine. But you will also give those 23 people the justice they deserved. Sarah looked at her trembling hands and thought about 3 generations of Mitchells who had been told their tremor was weakness. Thought about her grandfather Raphael reading The Wind Through Blood in the Pacific Theater. Thought about her father learning to trust the tremor with Dr. Chen's help only to have that knowledge buried when he refused an immoral order. Thought about herself, struggling through Scout Sniper School, believing she was defective until the moment she stopped fighting and let the tremor guide her to a perfect shot. The tremor was not weakness, it was legacy. It was the Mitchell family's voice of feeling truth when the world demanded comfortable lies. She began reading Drake's files while her father watched over her shoulder, and Palmer maintained watch on a bunker 3,520 meters away, where a man who had lost everything waited to see if James Mitchell's daughter had inherited more than just his genetic trait, waited to see if she had inherited his courage too. And as the sun tracked toward evening and the Montana wilderness darkened around Observation Post Bravo, Sarah Mitchell learned the full truth about 1999 and understood for the first time that the shot she was preparing to make had nothing to do with ending a siege and everything to do with deciding what kind of person she would become when the moment came to choose between orders and conscience. Her father had made his choice 27 years ago and lived with the consequences. Now it was her turn. The tremor in her hands intensified as she read, processing information her conscious mind could barely accept, turning horror and anger and determination into the physical manifestation of a nervous system that would not let her ignore what she had learned. Dawn would come, Drake would appear, and Sarah Mitchell would either take a shot that proved she was worthy of the legacy she carried or refuse it and prove she was worthy of something more important than marksmanship. Either way, the siege of Devil's Canyon was entering its final phase, and the woman behind the rifle, trembling with knowledge and anger and 3 generations of genetic sensitivity, would decide how this story ended. The files Marcus Drake transmitted contained 27 years of documentation that read like an indictment of American military intelligence operations in the post-Cold War era. Sarah read through the night while her father sat beside her in the hide, and Palmer maintained watch on the bunker 3,520 meters away. The documents were organized chronologically, beginning with incident reports from 1999 and extending through evidence collected over nearly 3 decades of obsessive investigation. The first file was a classified Army Corps of Engineers assessment dated February 12, 1999, authored by then Captain Marcus Drake. The facility in question sat 3 miles north of the Mexican border in a region so remote that the nearest town consisted of a gas station, a general store, and 12 permanent residents who minded their own business and asked no questions about the government vehicles that occasionally passed through. The official designation was Border Chemical Research Station 7, and according to public records accessible through normal channels, it did not exist. Drake's assessment was clinical and thorough, documenting a concrete structure built into a hillside with independent power generation, advanced ventilation systems designed for handling hazardous materials, and security protocols that exceeded anything justified for the stated purpose of monitoring cartel drug manufacturing operations. His engineering analysis covered structural integrity, defensive positioning, even the electrical systems that powered the facility. But buried in the technical details was a paragraph that made Sarah's hands shake so badly she had to set down the tablet and take several deep breaths before continuing. Observed multiple civilian contractors with family housing adjacent to primary facility. Housing consists of 12 residential units, occupied, with evidence of children, including playground equipment and school bus service. Interviewed 3 contractors who identified themselves as biochemists, working for a private defense company under Department of Defense contract. When questioned about the nature of their work, all 3 claimed they were developing vaccine delivery systems for military personnel deploying to regions with endemic disease. Specifically mentioned work on aerosolized vaccine platforms and rapid immunization protocols. None were aware of cartel activity in the area. None expressed concern about working in a border region. All believed their work was legitimate medical research supporting troop health and readiness. Recommend immediate investigation of contractor credentials and project authorization before proceeding with planned tactical operation. Drake had known. He had documented civilian presence, had interviewed the contractors, had questioned the official narrative that painted them as complicit in criminal activity, had recommended exactly the kind of investigation that might have prevented 23 deaths. The next file was a response from his commanding officer, a Marine colonel named Richard Hawthorne, who Sarah's father had mentioned during their phone conversation. The response was dated February 15, 1999, just 3 days before the raid. It was terse and dismissive, written in the clipped military style that brooked no argument. Captain Drake, Your engineering assessment is noted, but operational timeline does not permit delay for additional investigation. Contractors at the site are considered complicit in illegal activities based on intelligence from federal agencies, including DEA and FBI. Facility represents clear and present danger to border security. Proceed with demolition. Preparation as ordered. Have charges ready for remote detonation by February 18th. Sarah looked at her father, who was reading over her shoulder with an expression that combined vindication and grief. They ordered him to rig the site even after he reported civilian presence. Her father nodded slowly. Richard Hawthorne was the commanding officer who testified that Marcus had been negligent, that he had rushed his assessment and missed warning signs. But these files show Marcus did exactly what he was supposed to do. He identified the problem and recommended investigation. Hawthorne overruled him and ordered him to proceed anyway. The next file was a personnel record for Colonel Richard Hawthorne, showing his career progression after 1999. Promoted to Brigadier General in 2002, Major General in 2007, retired in 2015 with full honors and immediately hired as Vice President of the same private defense company that had employed the contractors killed in the explosion. Current position as of 2026 was Senior Advisor to the Secretary of Defense on Border Security Operations. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. The man who ordered the operation that killed 23 people went on to a successful career and is now advising current military policy, while Drake and my father were destroyed for trying to prevent those deaths. Her father's hands were shaking so badly now that he had to clasp them together. That's how the system works, Mia. The people who make catastrophic decisions get promoted. The people who question those decisions get eliminated. Marcus and I learned that lesson in 1999. You're learning it now. The files continued. Autopsy reports showing that the 23 dead included children, specifically Michelle Drake, age 7, and 4 other children ranging from ages 3 to 11. Toxicology reports indicating no drug manufacturing chemicals in their systems, no evidence they had been exposed to methamphetamine or its precursors. Forensic analysis of the facility showing no drug production equipment, no cartel weapons, nothing that matched the official narrative of a narcotics laboratory. But the most damning files were the classified research reports. Project Sentinel had been authorized in 1997 under a Department of Defense black budget allocation with minimal congressional oversight. The stated purpose was developing rapid response biological countermeasures for potential terrorist attacks using engineered pathogens. The actual work, conducted by civilian contractors who believed they were developing legitimate military vaccines, involved creating delivery systems for biological agents that violated the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention. When Marcus Drake and James Mitchell were assigned to assess the facility in 1999, they had walked into an illegal research program that multiple federal agencies had known about, but chose to ignore because shutting it down would require admitting the United States was conducting prohibited weapons research. The contractors working there were innocent, believing they were supporting defensive medical research. Their families lived adjacent to the facility because the remote location and security protocols had been sold to them as necessary precautions for working with dangerous pathogens. Drake's demolition charges, rigged as a contingency in case the raid encountered hostile resistance, were detonated when someone inside the facility triggered the fire alarm during the federal breach. 23 people died instantly. The government classified the incident, blamed the explosion on cartel booby traps, and forced Drake and Mitchell to provide testimony that supported the cover story or face prosecution. Sarah closed the tablet and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to process the enormity of what she had read. These people were murdered by their own government, and then the government destroyed the careers of the two men who tried to save them. Her father's voice was barely a whisper. Now you understand why Marcus has spent 27 years preparing for this moment. Why he built his fortress and took these hostages and demanded that the truth finally be acknowledged. He's not a terrorist, Sarah. He's a man who lost everything trying to do the right thing and decided that if he was going to die anyway, he might as well die, forcing the truth into the light. Palmer's voice interrupted from his position at the spotting scope. Sergeant, we've got movement at the bunker. Multiple thermal signatures moving toward the observation window. Sarah moved to her rifle and pressed her eye to the scope, immediately spotting the activity Palmer had detected. Three figures visible through the bunker's windows, backlit by interior lights, moving with purpose. Then Marcus Drake appeared at the observation window, and even at 3,500 meters, Sarah could see that he was holding something in his hands. Palmer adjusted his spotting scope. He's got a tablet or portable screen, displaying something toward our position. Sarah increased magnification on her rifle scope and saw that Drake was indeed holding a large tablet oriented so that anyone observing from the ridgeline could read the text displayed on it. The message was simple and devastating. Sarah Mitchell, your spotter has been feeding me tactical data for 3 months. He is not compromised by coercion. He volunteered. Ask him about his brother. Sarah felt her world tilt sideways. She turned to look at Palmer, who had gone absolutely still at his spotting scope, and in that moment of frozen silence, she knew that Drake's message was true. Palmer had been working with Drake, had been compromising their operation, had been betraying her trust for reasons she did not yet understand. Palmer, she said quietly, voice tight with controlled fury, talk to me, right now. Palmer did not look away from his scope. He kept his eye pressed to the optic, maintaining professional watch discipline even as his world collapsed around him. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but carried the weight of decisions made and consequences accepted. My brother was killed in 2019. Army Ranger 2nd Battalion, deployed to classified location conducting classified mission. Official cause of death was training accident during live fire exercise at Fort Benning. That's what they told my mother at the funeral. That's what the Army put on his death certificate. Training accident, like he had somehow accidentally shot himself in the head while running drills on a Georgia firing range. Palmer finally turned to face her, and Sarah saw tears tracking through the camouflage paint on his face. But the Rangers who served with him, his squad mates who came to the funeral in dress uniform and stood at attention during the burial, they told me the truth afterward, pulled me aside at the reception, and said they could not let the lie stand, even if it cost them their careers. My brother was killed executing an illegal cross-border operation into Mexico that should never have been authorized. Same kind of mission that killed those civilians in 1999. They were targeting a suspected cartel compound based on intelligence that turned out to be fabricated. Went in hot, found a family gathering instead of cartel members, and my brother refused to fire on children. His team leader shot him in the back of the head to maintain operational security and prevent him from reporting the mistake. Made it look like enemy fire. The team leader was promoted 6 months later. Sarah felt her anger mixing with something else. Grief for a brother she had never met. Killed for the same reason her father and Drake had been destroyed. For doing the right thing when orders demanded the wrong thing. So you've been helping Drake? Feeding him intelligence about our operation? Compromising federal tactical plans? Putting the hostages at risk? Palmer's jaw tightened. Drake contacted me 6 months ago through an encrypted channel I still don't understand how he accessed. Sent me classified documents about the operation that killed my brother. Showed me the connection between the 2019 mission and the 1999 massacre. Same chain of command. Same intelligence failures. Same cover-up protocols. Showed me that the system had not learned anything in 20 years. Was still willing to sacrifice good soldiers to protect bad decisions. He offered to help me get justice for my brother if I helped him with tactical information about the federal response to the siege, information about sniper deployments, assault team positioning, command protocols. Nothing that would directly harm hostages, just enough to let him stay one step ahead of federal tactical planning. And you said yes. I said yes, Palmer confirmed, because at some point you have to decide whether your oath is to the institution or to the truth. The institution will use you and discard you the same way it used and discarded your father. The same way it used and discarded Marcus Drake. The same way it used and discarded my brother when he refused to murder children. I chose truth, and if that makes me a traitor in the eyes of the Marine Corps, then I'm a traitor. But I can look at myself in the mirror. Can you say the same about the generals who ordered my brother into that mission and then covered up his murder? Her father's voice cut through the tension. Palmer, did Drake predict that Sarah would figure out you were compromised? Palmer nodded slowly. He said she would detect the inconsistencies in my wind calls. Said anyone with the Mitchell genetic trait would sense when environmental data didn't match what their nervous system was telling them. He wanted her to know I was feeding him information because it was part of the test. What test? Palmer gestured toward the bunker where Drake still stood at the observation window. The test he's about to give him. He told me 3 months ago that when James Mitchell's daughter finally arrived, he would present her with a shot that was technically impossible. A shot that required complete trust in the tremor technique, complete disregard for instruments and calculations and everything a scout sniper school teaches. He said if she could make that shot, it would prove the Mitchell bloodline still produced warriors worthy of respect. And then he would surrender. Sarah looked at her father. Did you know Palmer was compromised? Her father shook his head. But I'm not surprised Marcus anticipated it. He's had 27 years to plan every detail of this operation, including recruiting people who have personal reasons to want the truth exposed. Palmer's brother, the hostages who are actually whistleblowers investigating 1999, even getting me authorized to come here. Marcus has been orchestrating this entire scenario to create a moment where you have to choose between following orders and seeking justice. And if I choose orders, if I kill him when he presents this impossible shot, then the siege ends, the hostages go home, and the truth about 1999 stays buried. You become a hero and spend the rest of your life wondering if you just helped the government win one more time. And if I choose justice? Her father looked toward the bunker where his best friend waited to test whether James Mitchell's daughter had inherited more than just genetic sensitivity. Then you take the shot Marcus designed for Yaum, and we find out what happens when a Mitchell finally refuses to let evil hide behind classified stamps and career threats. Before Sarah could respond, Drake's voice emerged from the encrypted radio, calm and certain as a man who had been preparing for this moment since his daughter died in an explosion he had rigged. Sarah Mitchell, you have read the files. You know the truth about 1999. You know that your father and I were victims of a system that values secrecy over accountability. You know that 23 people died to protect illegal weapons, research, and political careers. Now you get to decide what to do with that knowledge. At dawn, I will present you with a shot. Not the simple exposure I gave you yesterday, something harder, something that will test whether you have truly mastered your gift or are still fighting it. If you make the shot, I surrender and release all hostages. If you miss, I execute one hostage, and we continue this siege until you are relieved and replaced by a sniper who will kill me without hesitation. If you refuse to shoot at all, I will consider it a sign that you want more time to decide what kind of Marine you are. Choose carefully. Your father made his choice in 1999. Palmer made his choice 6 months ago. Now you make yours. The transmission ended. Sarah looked at the chronometer on her rifle scope. 0347 hours. Dawn would break in approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes. She had that long to decide whether to take a shot that Marcus Drake had spent 27 years preparing, a shot designed to test the limits of human capability and genetic gift, a shot that would either end the siege or prove that some truths were worth dying for. Her father moved closer, close enough that she could feel the tremor in his hands transmitted through the air between them. Mija, I need to tell you something about the day your mother left. Something I should have told you 20 years ago. Sarah turned to look at him, seeing the weight of decades in his expression. When Margaret walked out with her suitcase, she didn't just leave because of the disgrace. She left because I told her the truth about 1999. Told her that I had a choice between exposing illegal weapons research and protecting our family. Told her I chose family over conscience. She looked at me like I was a stranger and said she could forgive me for being court-martialed, but she couldn't forgive me for being a coward. I haven't seen her since. Sarah felt tears trying to form but forced them back. Why are you telling me this now? Because you need to know that choosing conscience over orders has costs. Real costs. Your mother left me. The Marine Corps destroyed me. I spent 27 years drinking myself stupid trying to forget that I had the chance to do the right thing and chose survival instead. If you take the shot Marcus is offering, if you help him expose the truth, you will lose things you care about. Your career, probably. Maybe your freedom if they decide to prosecute you for refusing lawful orders. The system will try to break you the same way it broke Marcus and me. Then why would I do it? Her father smiled, and it was the saddest smile Sarah had ever seen. Because the alternative is spending the rest of your life as I have spent mine. Looking at yourself in the mirror and knowing that when the moment came to stand for something, you chose comfort over courage. I can't tell you what to do, Sarah, but I can tell you that no career is worth that price. No pension or honor or ribbon is worth knowing you helped bury the truth. Palmer spoke from his position at the spotting scope. "Sergeant, I know I've lost your trust, but for what it's worth, Drake told me to tell you something if you discovered I was working with him. He said the shot he's going to present is designed to be impossible if you rely on instruments and training. But if you trust the tremor completely, if you surrender to what your body is telling you and ignore everything else, the shot becomes merely difficult instead of impossible. He said your grandfather Raphael made shots like this in the Pacific. Your father made shots like this before 1999. And you can make this shot if you stop being afraid of your own gift." Sarah looked at her hands, watching them shake in the cold darkness, and wondered if 3 generations of Mitchell snipers had led to this moment. A moment where genetic gift and moral choice converged into a single trigger press that would either vindicate or condemn everything her family had been. The next 2 hours passed in silence, broken only by Palmer's quiet environmental updates and her father's occasional observations about tremor patterns and atmospheric conditions. Sarah did not speak to Palmer beyond necessary tactical communications. The betrayal was still too raw, too immediate to process, but she also understood that Palmer had made the same choice her father had been too afraid to make in 1999, had chosen truth over career, justice over orders, and accepted the consequences. At 0545 hours, the sky began to lighten in the east. First light came slow and hesitant, gray before gold, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken as dawn approached. She checked her rifle one final time, verified 0, confirmed ammunition, went through the pre-shot checklist that had become ritual. But beneath the familiar routine, her hands were shaking with an intensity that would have disqualified her from firing if she had been relying on traditional technique. Instead, she did what her father had taught her, stopped fighting the tremor and started reading it. The shake in her right hand was faster than her left, indicating wind from the northeast. The tremor intensity was building, suggesting atmospheric pressure was dropping. The frequency was synchronized with her heartbeat, meaning she had achieved the harmonic resonance that Dr. Chen had identified as optimal for precision shooting. Palmer's voice was soft, target areas lighting up, multiple thermal signatures moving. Stand by for Drake's appearance. Sarah pressed her eye to the scope and waited. The bunker observation window came into sharp focus at maximum magnification. She could see movement behind the glass, shadows passing back and forth as dawn light filtered into the command center. Then Marcus Drake appeared, and Sarah understood immediately what he meant by an impossible shot. Drake was not standing still with arms spread as he had the previous morning. He was moving, walking back and forth across the observation windows in a pattern that seemed random, but probably was not. And he was not alone. 2 other figures flanked him, also moving, creating a dynamic environment where target identification became as challenging as marksmanship. But that was not what made the shot impossible. What made it impossible was the glass. Palmer's voice confirmed what Sarah was seeing. He's placed additional barriers in the observation window. Looks like multiple layers of transparent material creating refraction that will affect bullet trajectory. I'm reading 3 distinct layers, each at a slightly different angle. Bullet will have to penetrate all 3 while compensating for the deflection each layer creates. Sarah calculated quickly. Multiple glass layers meant multiple trajectory deviations. Each layer would slow the bullet and change its path based on the angle of impact and the material properties of the glass. At 3,500 meters, those tiny deflections would compound into feet of deviation. The shot required her to calculate not just wind and gravity and atmospheric conditions, but also the complex physics of a bullet passing through multiple refractive barriers. It was, as Drake had promised, impossible for a normal sniper. But Sarah's tremor was telling her something. She let her eyes unfocus slightly, stopped trying to calculate the glass refraction mathematically, and instead just felt the environment. The tremor in her hands was creating a pattern, a rhythm that seemed to pulse in sync with Drake's movement across the window. Her nervous system was processing his speed, his trajectory, the timing of his appearances behind each section of glass. And suddenly she understood. The shot was not impossible if she stopped trying to aim where Drake was and instead aimed where he was going to be. Her tremor was predicting his movement pattern, giving her a firing solution that integrated all the variables into pure physical intuition. Palmer called out environmental data. Wind 3 miles per hour northeast. Temperature 41 degrees. Barometric pressure 29.8 and falling. Range 3,520 meters exact. Target is moving left to right across observation window at approximately 1 meter per second. Glass refraction creating estimated 12 to 18-inch deflection based on angle of impact. But Sarah was not listening to the instruments anymore. She was listening to her tremor. The shake in her right hand peaked rhythmically, creating a pulse that matched Drake's movement pattern across the window. Her left hand trembled at a different frequency, processing wind and temperature data that her conscious mind could not calculate fast enough. Both hands synchronized briefly every 3.2 seconds, and Sarah realized with crystalline clarity that this was when Drake would be positioned behind the weakest section of the glass array, the moment when bullet deflection would be minimized. She had perhaps 2 seconds to take the shot before the window closed. 2 seconds to integrate years of training with a genetic gift, to trust that her body knew things her mind could not prove. Her breathing slowed to the rhythm her father had taught her earlier, not fighting the tremor, but riding it like a surfer rides a wave, feeling its peaks and valleys, understanding its language. The tremor in her right hand spiked. Drake was crossing into the firing zone. Her left hand went still for a fraction of a second, meaning atmospheric conditions had achieved perfect stability. Her heartbeat synchronized with both tremors, creating the harmonic resonance that Dr. Chen had spent years studying. This was the moment, now or never. Sarah aimed not at where Drake was, but where her tremor told her he would be, in the 4.2 seconds it would take the bullet to reach the target. Aim not at the center of the glass panels, but at an angle 6 degrees off what her training said was correct. An angle that her tremor insisted would minimize cumulative deflection. Aimed at a point in space that her conscious mind said was wrong, but her nervous system knew was precisely right. Her finger increased pressure on the trigger. Not a jerk, not a pull, just a gradual squeeze that built tension across 3 pounds of resistance until the sear released and the firing pin struck the primer and the rifle exploded with controlled violence against her shoulder. The bullet left the barrel at 2,950 feet per second and began its journey across 2 miles of Montana wilderness. Sarah watched through the scope, breathing suspended, while the projectile flew. 4.2 seconds stretched into eternity. She could see the bullet's vapor trail in the cold morning air, could track its ballistic arc as it climbed and then descended, could watch it approach the bunker at velocities that made time itself seem elastic. Impact on the first glass panel came at 1.4 seconds. The bullet struck at the exact angle Sarah's tremor had predicted, and the glass shattered in a pattern that suggested minimal deflection. Fragments sprayed outward, but the bullet's core trajectory held true. Second glass panel at 2.8 seconds. Another impact, another shower of fragments, another deflection that should have been catastrophic but somehow was manageable. The bullet was behaving as if it knew where it needed to go, as if Sarah's genetic sensitivity had transmitted intent across 2 miles of space. Third glass panel at 4.1 seconds. The bullet was slowing now, deflected multiple times, its energy bleeding away with each barrier penetrated. It struck the final panel at an angle so shallow that physics suggested it should have ricocheted harmlessly. Instead, it punched through with just enough force remaining to complete its mission. And then Marcus Drake went down, clutching his right shoulder exactly where Sarah had aimed without consciously choosing that specific point of impact. Not killed. Sarah knew immediately from the way he fell that her bullet had struck exactly where she had intended without consciously intending it. His right shoulder. The same location her father had suggested when they had discussed non-lethal shots. A wound that would disable without killing, that would incapacitate without executing. Palmer's voice was stunned. Hit confirmed. Target is down. Wound appears non-lethal. He's moving, talking to his people. This is impossible. You just made a shot through 3 layers of glass at 3,500 meters while the target was moving, and you hit precisely where you chose to hit. Sarah kept her eye on the scope, watching as Drake's people helped him away from the window. She saw him look directly toward her position one final time before disappearing into the bunker's interior. And even at this distance, even through the shattered glass and the dawn light, she saw him nod, a gesture of respect between warriors, an acknowledgement that she had passed his test. The encrypted radio crackled. Drake's voice emerged, strained with pain, but carrying satisfaction. Sarah Mitchell, you made the shot, 3 generations of genetic gift culminating in precision that I have spent 27 years waiting to witness. Your grandfather would be proud. Your father is proud. I am proud. And because you proved yourself worthy of the Mitchell name, I am now fulfilling my promise. All hostages are being released. My people are standing down. Federal forces can enter the bunker without resistance. The siege ends here. But before I surrender, I need you to understand something. The shot you just made was not designed to kill me. It was designed to prove that someone in this operation understood what really happened in 1999. You could have aimed for center mass, could have eliminated me as ordered, but you chose a wound instead of an execution. Chose to disable rather than destroy. That choice tells me that you read the files, understood the truth, and decided that even a man who has held hostages and killed federal agents deserves something better than a bullet through the heart when his cause was just. I am surrendering now. The evidence I have collected over 27 years is already being transmitted to media outlets, congressional oversight committees, and military investigators who have been trying to reopen the 1999 case. General Richard Hawthorne and the other officials who ordered the massacre will finally face accountability. The 23 people who died, including my daughter Michelle, will finally be acknowledged. And your father, James Mitchell, will finally have his honor restored because the world will know that he tried to prevent the massacre and was destroyed for being right. Thank you, Sarah Mitchell, for being the Marine your father wanted to be, for having the courage he could not find when the moment came, for proving that the next generation can be better than the one before. I am sorry for the hostages I took and the agents I killed, but I am not sorry for forcing this reckoning. Some truths are worth dying for. The transmission ended. Sarah lowered her rifle and let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. Her hands were still shaking, tremors that were part genetic sensitivity and part emotional release. She had made an impossible shot, had wounded rather than killed, had chosen conscience over orders just as her father had failed to do 27 years ago. Palmer was already on the radio coordinating with Colonel Brennan. Federal assault teams were moving into position to enter the bunker and secure the hostages. Medical evacuation was being arranged for Drake's gunshot wound. The siege that had lasted 7 months was ending not with a dramatic assault, but with a surrender negotiated through precision marksmanship and moral choice. Her father put his hand on Sarah's shoulder, and she felt his tremor transmitted through the touch. You did it, Mija. You made the choice I could not make. And you made the shot that proves our family legacy is not failure. It is courage that sometimes takes generations to fully manifest. Sarah looked at him and saw tears streaming down his face. Tears of pride mixed with grief, mixed with relief that his daughter had succeeded where he had failed. She put her hand over his, feeling both their tremors synchronize into a single rhythm, and understood that this moment was not just about ending a siege. It was about 3 generations of warriors finding redemption through a young woman who had learned to trust her gift instead of fearing it. Colonel Brennan's voice came over the radio 30 minutes later. All hostages secured. Drake is in custody receiving medical treatment. Siege is officially ended. Sniper Team Alpha, prepare for extraction and debriefing. And Sergeant Mitchell, we are going to have a very long conversation about your decision to refuse extraction orders, maintain communication with a hostile force, and fire a non-lethal shot when lethal force was authorized. Sarah keyed her transmit switch. Understood, ma'am. Ready for extraction when you are. But she was not ready. Not really. Because she knew that what came next would be far harder than making an impossible shot across 2 miles of wilderness. What came next was facing the consequences of choosing truth over orders, of refusing to be complicit in cover-up, of proving that some legacies were worth preserving even when institutions wanted them buried. As the sun rose fully over Devil's Canyon and the siege that had lasted 7 months dissolved into federal custody operations and media coverage, and the beginning of investigations that would eventually vindicate Marcus Drake and James Mitchell and the 23 people who had died in 1999, Sarah Mitchell sat in her hide and felt the tremor in her hands slowly diminish. Not disappearing, never disappearing, but settling into the steady rhythm that meant her nervous system had returned to baseline after the extreme stress of the shot. Palmer approached with coffee from a thermos, offering it without words. Sarah took it despite the betrayal, despite the broken trust, because she understood now that Palmer had made his choice the same way she had made hers. Both of them had decided that truth mattered more than career, that justice was worth the personal cost. "I'm sorry," Palmer said quietly, "for compromising the operation, for lying to you, for putting you at risk." Sarah drank the terrible instant coffee and looked at him. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Palmer shook his head. "Drake made me promise not to unless you discovered it yourself. He said the test required you to figure out that your environmental data was being contaminated, that your instruments were giving you false readings, that you needed to trust your tremor completely and ignore everything else, including me. You could have gotten me killed. I know. But Drake said if you had the Mitchell gift like your father and grandfather, you would detect the inconsistencies before they became dangerous. He was right. You figured it out." Sarah thought about that, about a siege that had been designed not just to force political accountability, but to test whether one young Marine had inherited the genetic sensitivity and moral courage that defined her family legacy. About Marcus Drake spending 27 years preparing an operation that would culminate in a single shot that either vindicated or condemned 3 generations of warriors. "What happens to you now?" Sarah asked. Palmer shrugged. Court-martial probably. Dishonorable discharge. Maybe prison time depending on how much the government wants to make an example of me. But my brother will be vindicated when Drake's evidence goes public. That's worth the price." "And what happens to me?" Her father, who had been listening to the conversation, answered that question. "What happens to you depends on how badly the government wants to bury this story. If they decide to make you a hero, to spin the non-lethal shot as brilliant tactical decision-making that saved hostages and ended the siege peacefully, then you might survive with your career intact. If they decide to make you a cautionary tale, to punish you for refusing orders and communicating with Drake, then you will be destroyed the same way I was destroyed. Which do you think will happen?" Her father looked toward the bunker where federal agents were processing the scene and Marcus Drake was being loaded into a medical helicopter. "I think," he said slowly, "that for the first time in 27 years, the truth is going to win. Because you made it impossible for them to bury this story. You made a shot that will be studied and analyzed and celebrated regardless of what they do to your career. You proved that the Mitchell tremor is not a weakness, but a gift. And most importantly, you proved that the next generation of warriors can be better than the one before. That is something they cannot take away, no matter how hard they try." Sarah finished the coffee and stood, feeling the stiffness in her muscles from hours in the prone position, feeling the weight of what she had done settling into her bones. She had made history with a single shot, had ended a siege, had vindicated her father and Marcus Drake and 23 people who had died unanswered for 27 years, had proven that conscience could still matter in a system that valued compliance over courage. But she had also disobeyed orders, communicated with an enemy, and made tactical decisions based on personal moral calculus rather than operational requirements. The Marine Corps would have to respond. The question was whether they would recognize what she had done as valor or condemn it as mutiny. Colonel Brennan arrived at Observation Post Bravo as the sun climbed higher, bringing with her a security detail and an expression that revealed nothing. Sarah stood at attention, rifle slung across her back, hands still trembling slightly from the after effects of the shot. "Sergeant Mitchell," Brennan said formally, "you are relieved from duty pending investigation into your conduct during this operation. You will surrender your weapon and accompany me to the Tactical Operations Center for debriefing. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Brennan took Sarah's rifle, examining it with the appreciation of someone who understood what it represented. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Smallest smile Sarah had ever seen, barely a curve at the corners of the colonel's mouth, but genuine. "That was the most spectacular shot I have witnessed in 30 years of military service," Brennan said quietly. "Technically impossible, morally complex, tactically brilliant. You are either going to receive a medal or face a court-martial, possibly both. But regardless of what happens next, I want you to know that what you did here will be remembered." "Thank you, ma'am." As they walked toward the waiting helicopter that would extract them from the ridgeline, where Sarah had spent 2 days learning to trust her genetic gift and moral compass, her father fell into step beside her. He was not under arrest, technically just a civilian consultant who had fulfilled his role, but Sarah knew he would not leave until he saw her safely delivered to whatever came next. "Are you scared?" he asked. Sarah thought about that, about career and consequences, and the possibility that she had just destroyed everything she had worked to build, about the tremor in her hands that would never go away, that would mark her as different for the rest of her life, about 3 generations of Mitchell warriors who had struggled with the same gift and the same burden. No, she said finally, I'm not scared, because even if they destroy my career the same way they destroyed yours, I will still know that when the moment came, I made the right choice. That has to be enough. Her father's hand found hers, trembling fingers intertwining with trembling fingers. Genetic legacy made physical. It is enough, Mija. It is more than enough. The helicopter lifted them away from Observation Post Bravo as federal teams continued processing the bunker and releasing hostages and documenting evidence. Below them, Devil's Canyon spread out in shades of green and gold under morning sun, beautiful and indifferent to the human drama that had played out across its wilderness. And somewhere in that landscape, in a medical facility surrounded by federal agents, Marcus Drake was beginning the long process of recovery from a gunshot wound delivered with such precision that it had proved a point 27 years in the making. The siege was over. The truth was emerging. And Sarah Mitchell, 27 years old with her father's tremor and her grandfather's gift and her great-grandfather's courage, was flying toward an uncertain future, knowing that she had honored her family legacy in the only way that mattered, by choosing conscience over convenience, by trusting the tremor that made her different, by making an impossible shot that said some truths were worth fighting for regardless of personal cost. Her hands shook all the way to the debriefing, and for the first time in her life, Sarah Mitchell was proud of the tremor instead of ashamed of it, because it had guided her to a shot that changed everything, including herself. The debriefing lasted 14 hours across 3 days, conducted in a windowless room at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., where fluorescent lights never dimmed and coffee never stopped flowing, and Sarah Mitchell answered the same questions over and over until the words stopped meaning anything and became just sounds her mouth made to satisfy interrogators who already knew the answers. Why did you refuse extraction orders from Colonel Brennan? Because the tactical situation required continued observation and Drake had promised additional intelligence relevant to the operation. Why did you maintain communication with a hostile force? Because that hostile force was offering information about a 27-year-old massacre that had never been properly investigated. Why did you fire a non-lethal shot when lethal force was authorized? Because eliminating the target would have ended the siege but buried the truth, and some truths are worth preserving even at tactical cost. The interrogators were FBI and counterintelligence specialists who had seen every kind of betrayal and compromise and corruption that humans were capable of inflicting on each other. They asked questions designed to trap Sarah in contradictions, to expose hidden motivations, to determine whether she had been manipulated by Drake or recruited by Palmer or acting on her own moral calculus in defiance of chain of command. They reviewed her communications logs, examined her personal history, interviewed everyone who had ever served with her going back to boot camp. And through it all, Sarah's hands shook, not from stress, though there was plenty of that, not from fear, though she understood that her career hung in the balance and possibly her freedom if they decided to prosecute her for disobeying direct orders. Her hands shook because that was what Mitchell hands did, because the tremor was genetic legacy made visible. 3 generations of warriors who had learned to read truth through nervous system sensitivity that most people would never understand. On the 4th day, the tone of the questioning changed. The FBI specialists were replaced by a different breed of interrogator. Marine Corps investigators, officers who understood operational realities and tactical decisions in ways that civilian law enforcement could not. They asked different questions, not about loyalty or compromise, but about the shot itself, the impossible shot through triple glass barriers at a moving target 3,520 meters distant. Sergeant Mitchell, explain how you compensated for glass refraction when your spotting scope could not accurately measure the deflection angle. I did not compensate using instruments, sir. I used proprioceptive feedback to detect the optimal firing solution. Explain proprioceptive feedback. Sarah thought about Dr. Sarah Chen's research from 1987, about her grandfather Raphael's journals from World War II, about her father's patient instruction on the ridgeline overlooking Devil's Canyon. It is a genetic trait that allows enhanced environmental awareness through nervous system sensitivity. The tremor in my hands processes atmospheric data faster than conscious calculation. When properly trained, this allows intuitive targeting that appears to violate standard ballistic principles, but actually represents superior sensory integration. The Marine investigator, a colonel named James Rodriguez, who had spent 30 years in reconnaissance and special operations, studied Sarah with an expression that mixed skepticism and fascination. You are claiming that shaking hands make you a better sniper? I am claiming that what appears to be shaking hands is actually a nervous system processing environmental variables at accelerated rates. My great-grandfather had this trait. My grandfather had it. My father has it. Research conducted by Dr. Sarah Chen at the Naval Medical Research Center in the 1980s documented the physiological basis and tactical applications. The research was classified when my father was discharged in 1999, but the underlying science remains valid. Rodriguez consulted his tablet, pulling up files that Sarah recognized as her father's medical evaluations from decades ago. We found Dr. Chen's research in the archives. Classified, top secret, buried under so many access restrictions that it took a presidential authorization to retrieve. The research indicates that your father, James Mitchell, demonstrated the ability to predict atmospheric changes seconds before instruments detected them. Dr. Chen believed this was an evolutionary adaptation that could be trained and utilized for precision marksmanship at extreme ranges. Is that what you did at Devil's Canyon? Yes, sir. My father taught me the technique that Dr. Chen developed. I applied it to a shot that conventional methods could not solve. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in 4 days, someone looked at Sarah without suspicion or judgment, just professional assessment of capability and decision-making under impossible circumstances. Sergeant Mitchell, you made a shot that will be analyzed by military marksmanship instructors for the next 50 years. You ended a 7-month siege without additional casualties. You secured the release of 50 hostages, and you did it while disobeying direct orders, maintaining unauthorized communication with a hostile force, and making tactical decisions based on personal moral philosophy rather than operational doctrine. The question facing this review board is whether that makes you a hero or a liability. Sarah met his eyes without flinching. With respect, sir, I believe it makes me a Marine who chose conscience over convenience when the situation demanded it. The same choice my father was punished for making in 1999. If the Marine Corps wants to punish me for that choice, I accept the consequences. But I will not apologize for refusing to be complicit in covering up government crimes. The room went silent. The other investigators exchanged glances. Rodriguez tapped his stylus against the tablet for several long seconds before speaking again. Stand by for decision from the Commandant's office. You are confined to quarters pending final determination. Dismissed. Sarah saluted and left the interrogation room, escorted by military police to temporary quarters in the Marine barracks at 8th and I Street. Her father was waiting in the hallway outside, looking older and more tired than she had ever seen him, but also somehow more alive, as if the events of the past week had rekindled something in him that had been dormant for 27 years. They did not speak during the walk to her quarters. Military police were present, recording everything, and some conversations required privacy. But when Sarah was finally alone in the small room with its military-issued bed and desk and window overlooking the parade ground where her father had been stripped of rank 30 years ago, she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the weight of what she had done. She had disobeyed orders, had communicated with an enemy, had made a tactical decision that prioritized truth over efficiency, and she had no idea whether that would result in vindication or destruction. Her father's voice came through the door, soft enough that surveillance microphones might not catch it. I am proud of you, Mija. Whatever they decide, know that you did the right thing. Sarah did not respond, just sat in silence and watched the sun set over Washington, D.C., and wondered if this was how her father had felt in 1999, waiting to learn whether choosing conscience over career had been worth the cost. The answer came 3 days later. Sarah was summoned to the Commandant's office at Marine Corps headquarters, a formal summons that required dress blues and the kind of nervous preparation that preceded either medals or court-martial. Her father was not permitted to attend, but Colonel Rodriguez was there, along with several other senior officers whose ribbons and badges spoke to decades of service and conflicts spanning multiple theaters of war. The Commandant, General Margaret Chen, was a compact woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat to be impressed by anything less than absolute competence. She was also, Sarah realized with a jolt of recognition, related to Dr. Sarah Chen, who had studied her father in the 1980s. The resemblance was unmistakable. Sergeant Mitchell, the commandant said without preamble, your actions at Devil's Canyon have created a significant problem for this institution. On one hand, you disobeyed direct orders from a superior officer, maintained unauthorized communication with a hostile force, and made tactical decisions that violated operational protocol. Those actions, taken in isolation, constitute grounds for court-martial and dishonorable discharge. Sarah kept her face neutral, hands clasped behind her back to hide the tremor that always intensified under stress. On the other hand, the commandant continued, you made a shot that military analysts are calling the most difficult, successful engagement in modern sniper history. You ended a 7-month siege without additional casualties. You secured the release of 50 federal agents. And in doing so, you exposed a 27-year-old conspiracy involving illegal weapons research, civilian massacres, and systematic cover-up that has already resulted in the resignation of the Secretary of Defense and multiple ongoing criminal investigations. The commandant stood and walked to the window overlooking the parade ground. My aunt, Dr. Sarah Chen, spent 3 years in the 1980s studying a genetic trait she believed could revolutionize precision marksmanship. She documented that trait in your father, James Mitchell, and recommended development of specialized training protocols. Her research was classified and buried when your father was discharged for refusing to participate in the 1999 operation that killed 23 civilians. The Marine Corps made a choice at that time to suppress evidence of a genetic advantage because acknowledging it would require acknowledging that we had destroyed the career of one of our best snipers for doing the right thing. General Chen turned to face Sarah directly. You have given us an opportunity to correct that historical mistake. The shot you made at Devil's Canyon cannot be explained by conventional training or equipment. It requires acknowledgement of the genetic sensitivity that you inherited from your father. By validating your capability, we validate his. By promoting you, we implicitly acknowledge that discharging him was wrong. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Promoting me, ma'am? The commandant returned to her desk and picked up a document bearing multiple signatures and official seals. Effective immediately, you are promoted to Staff Sergeant. You are assigned to Marine Corps Warfighting Laboratory at Quantico, Virginia, with a mandate to develop training protocols for the genetic trait my aunt identified 40 years ago. We are calling it the Ghost Protocol, after the call sign you earned at Devil's Canyon. Your mission is to create a program that identifies Marines with this trait and teaches them to utilize it the way you utilized it, to turn what the institution has treated as a weakness into the tactical advantage it actually represents. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly now that she could not hide it. The commandant noticed and smiled slightly. Those tremors, Sergeant Mitchell, are no longer a liability in your service record. They are the qualification that makes you uniquely suited for this assignment. You will report to Quantico in 30 days to begin program development. Questions? Ma'am, what about the charges related to disobeying orders? The charges have been dismissed in recognition of the intelligence value of the information you secured from Marcus Drake and the tactical success of your actions. However, let me be clear. You are being given this opportunity because your disobedience resulted in an outcome that serves national security interests. Do not interpret this as license for future insubordination. The next time you disobey a direct order, there will be no second chance. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Understood completely. Dismissed, Staff Sergeant. Sarah saluted and turned to leave, but the commandant's voice stopped her at the door. One more thing. Your father is being invited to attend a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery in 2 weeks. The Department of Defense is issuing a formal apology for the 1999 incident and restoring his rank posthumously. Not posthumously, ma'am. My father is still alive. The commandant's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise or might have been satisfaction. Then he will receive his restoration in person. That is even better. Make sure he attends. Sarah left the commandant's office in a daze, promotion warrant in hand, mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. She had not been destroyed, had not been court-martialed, had been promoted and given a mission that would validate 3 generations of Mitchell genetic legacy. The system that had crushed her father had chosen to embrace his daughter, and in doing so, had implicitly acknowledged its own mistake. Her father was waiting outside headquarters, leaning against a rental car with the patient stillness of someone who had learned to accept whatever came. When he saw Sarah's expression, something in his face changed. A lifetime of bitterness and regret cracking to reveal hope underneath. "They promoted me," Sarah said. "Staff sergeant, assigned to Quantico to develop training for the Ghost Protocol." Her father's hands began to shake so badly that he had to lean harder against the car for support. "And me? You are being restored to rank at Arlington in 2 weeks, with full honors and a formal DOD apology." James Mitchell closed his eyes and tears began to stream down his weathered face. Tears he had probably been holding back for 27 years, since the day he chose his daughter's safety over his own honor, and spent the next 3 decades convinced he had made the wrong choice. Sarah moved to embrace him, and for the first time since she was 6 years old, father and daughter held each other without the weight of shame and failure between them. "I thought I would die without seeing this," her father whispered. "Thought I would go to my grave as a disgrace." "You are not a disgrace, Dad. You never were. You were a Marine who made an impossible choice and paid the price for doing what was right. Now everyone will know it." The ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery 2 weeks later was small by military standards, but carried a weight that transcended the number of attendees. The Marine Corps Honor Guard stood at attention in dress blues. A color guard presented the National Ensign and Marine Corps colors. And 70-year-old James Mitchell, wearing the dress uniform of a Marine colonel that he had not been authorized to wear for 27 years, stood before a podium where the Secretary of Defense read a statement that had been carefully crafted by lawyers and public affairs specialists to acknowledge error without admitting liability. Colonel James Mitchell served his country with distinction for 26 years. In 1999, he was asked to participate in an operation that he believed violated the laws of armed conflict and would result in civilian casualties. He refused that order based on moral grounds and was subsequently discharged. Subsequent investigation has revealed that Colonel Mitchell's assessment was correct. 23 civilians were killed in the operation he refused to support. His discharge was unjust. The United States Marine Corps and the Department of Defense formally apologized for this error and restore Colonel Mitchell to his rank with full honors, back pay, and benefits effective immediately. The Honor Guard fired a 21-gun salute. A bugler played taps. The commandant personally presented James Mitchell with a flag and a certificate restoring his rank. And Sarah stood at attention beside her father, watching him receive the vindication he had waited 3 decades to see, understanding that this moment was possible only because she had made the same choice he had made and survived it where he had not. But the true significance of the ceremony was not the restoration of one man's rank. It was what happened after the official proceedings ended, when Marcus Drake appeared from the crowd of attendees, despite being under federal indictment, and approached James Mitchell for the first time in 27 years. The two men stood facing each other, both old now, both carrying scars from a decision they had made together to testify against each other to protect what little they had left. Drake's right arm was in a sling from the gunshot wound Sarah had delivered 3 weeks earlier. Mitchell's hands were shaking with the tremor that had defined both their careers. "Brother," Drake said simply. Mitchell's voice was thick with emotion. "Marcus, I am sorry for testifying against you, for not fighting harder to expose the truth, for choosing survival over honor." Drake shook his head. "You chose your daughter over honor. That was the right choice. I chose revenge over sanity and spent 27 years destroying myself to make a point. You raised a daughter who had the courage we both lacked. That makes you the winner of this particular war." "We both lost," Mitchell said. "Michelle, Sarah's mother, 23 people who died for nothing. Everyone lost in 1999. But maybe," Drake said quietly, "their children can win what we lost. Your daughter made a shot that I designed to be impossible. She proved that the next generation can be better than we were. That has to count for something." The two men embraced, carefully because Drake's shoulder was still healing and Mitchell's body was brittle with age, and neither of them was steady enough to support the weight of their shared history. But the embrace was genuine, a reconciliation 27 years overdue, and Sarah watched with tears in her eyes as the two warriors who had been destroyed by the same system found peace with each other, if not with the past. Drake's legal situation resolved 6 months later through a plea agreement that recognized the complexity of his actions. Yes, he had taken hostages. Yes, he had killed 2 federal agents. Yes, he had violated dozens of federal statutes in his 7-month siege. But he had also exposed government crimes that would never have been investigated without his actions. The evidence he provided had already resulted in criminal charges against former Secretary of Defense Richard Hawthorne and 3 other senior officials involved in the 1999 cover-up. Congressional hearings were ongoing. The families of the 23 victims were finally receiving acknowledgement and compensation. The plea deal gave Drake 18 months in federal prison, followed by supervised release. He served his time at a minimum security facility in West Virginia, teaching other inmates about construction and engineering. When he was released, he began working for a veterans advocacy organization focused on whistleblower protection and accountability for illegal military operations. His daughter Michelle would never come back, but her death had finally been acknowledged, and the people responsible were facing consequences. Sarah visited him once during his incarceration, making the drive from Quantico to the federal prison on a cold February afternoon. They sat across a metal table in the visitor's room and talked about the shot that had ended the siege, about the genetic trait that made it possible, about the legacy of choosing truth over convenience. "Your father taught you well," Drake said, "better than I taught my people. I lost 2 of them in firefights with federal agents because I was too focused on justice to prioritize their safety. That is my failure and my burden." "You saved 50 hostages by surrendering when I made the shot," Sarah pointed out. "You kept your word even though it cost you everything. That counts for something." Drake touched his shoulder where the bullet had struck. The wound healed now, but leaving a scar he would carry for life. "You aimed for a non-lethal shot when you could have killed me. Wait, because my father loved you like a brother. Because you spent 27 years seeking justice for people no one else remembered. Because some men deserve to live, even when they have done terrible things in service of necessary truths." Drake was quiet for a long moment. "Your father raised a better person than I became. Tell him I said that." "I will." The Ghost Protocol program at Quantico began with a search through Marine Corps medical records going back 50 years, looking for personnel who had been flagged for essential tremor, stress-induced tremor, or any neurological condition that manifested as handshaking under pressure. The search identified 43 Marines currently serving and hundreds more who had been discharged or denied entry into precision marksmanship programs because of the trait. Sarah's team, consisting of herself, 2 sports medicine physicians, a neurologist, and a former Marine sniper who had washed out of Scout Sniper School because of tremors, began developing training protocols based on Dr. Chen's 1987 research and Sarah's own experience learning from her father. The core principle was simple: stop fighting the tremor. Start reading it as sensory data. The first test group consisted of 12 Marines, ages 21 to 35, all flagged for tremor-related performance issues. Sarah taught them what her father had taught her: how to feel wind through skin conductivity, how to detect temperature changes through tremor frequency shifts, how to recognize that different shake patterns corresponded to different atmospheric conditions, how to achieve harmonic resonance between tremor and heartbeat and breathing. 8 of the 12 Marines showed significant improvement within 6 weeks. By 3 months, all 12 were making shots at ranges that exceeded their previous best performance by 20 to 30%. By 6 months, the program was validated and expanded. The Marine Corps began screening recruits for the genetic trait, no longer treating it as a disqualification, but as a potential advantage that could be developed through specialized training. Sarah was promoted to gunnery sergeant at the 1-year mark and given command of the Ghost Protocol training cadre. Her father, now 72 and officially retired with full colonel's pension, visited Quantico regularly to lecture about his experiences and to share the journals his own father had kept during World War II. 3 generations of Mitchell snipers contributing to a program that validated their genetic legacy and ensured future generations would not face the discrimination they had endured. The program attracted attention from other services. Army Special Forces requested cross-training. Navy SEALs sent observers. CIA and FBI tactical units inquired about application of the technique to law enforcement scenarios. What had started as one woman making an impossible shot in Montana had evolved into a fundamental reassessment of how the military identified and trained precision marksmen. But Sarah's proudest moment came not from the program's expansion or the recognition it received. It came on a cold November morning 3 years after Devil's Canyon, when a young Marine named Jessica Chen, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chen, but carrying the same genetic sensitivity, showed up for her first day at Scout Sniper School. Private Chen was 22 years old, fresh out of infantry training, with exceptional marksmanship scores and a medical flag for stress-induced tremor. The flag had almost disqualified her from sniper training until her recruiter, who had read about the Ghost Protocol, recommended she be evaluated by Sarah's team first. Sarah met with Chen in her office at Quantico, watching the young Marine sit at attention with hands clasped tightly together to hide the shaking. Sarah recognized that posture, that shame, that desperate attempt to appear normal when your body insisted on being different. "Private Chen," Sarah said gently, "I need you to put your hands on the desk where I can see them." "Ma'am, I can control it if I concentrate." "I am not asking you to control it. I am asking you to show it to me." Chen reluctantly placed her hands on the desk, and Sarah watched the tremor manifest. High-frequency shake in the right hand, lower frequency in the left, pattern that pulsed in rhythm with the young Marine's heartbeat. Classic presentation of the Mitchell genetic trait, possibly even stronger than Sarah's own manifestation. "Private Chen, when did the tremor start?" "When I was 14, ma'am, got worse during boot camp. Medical said it was stress-related and would go away when I adjusted to military life. It has not gone away." "It will not go away," Sarah said, "because it is not stress. It is genetics. You have a trait that appears in roughly 1 in 10,000 people. The trait makes your nervous system more sensitive to environmental conditions. Under stress, that sensitivity manifests as visible tremor. But that tremor is not a weakness. It is enhanced proprioceptive awareness." "Ma'am, I do not understand." Sarah stood and gestured for Chen to follow her to the observation window overlooking the rifle range. "Watch the Marines on the firing line. What do they do before taking a shot?" "They check their equipment, ma'am. Wind meters, rangefinders, ballistic calculators." "Correct. They rely on instruments to tell them what the environment is doing. But you, Private Chen, you do not need instruments. Your tremor is already processing wind speed, temperature, atmospheric pressure, all the variables that affect bullet trajectory. Your body is the instrument. You just need to learn how to read what it is telling you." Chen looked at her hands with an expression that shifted from shame to tentative hope. "So the shaking is not because I am nervous or weak? The shaking is because you are genetically gifted. My father had it. My grandfather had it. My great-grandfather had it. All of us were told we were defective. All of us learned eventually that we were actually superior at environmental awareness. I'm going to teach you what my father taught me, how to turn your tremor into the most accurate environmental sensor in the Marine Corps." Over the next 6 months, Sarah trained Jessica Chen using the protocols her father had developed and Dr. Chen had validated decades earlier. Chen learned quickly, her natural talent combining with proper instruction to produce results that exceeded even Sarah's expectations. By graduation from Scout Sniper School, Chen was making shots at extreme range that impressed veteran instructors who had been skeptical about the Ghost Protocol. But the moment that defined Chen's training came during a stress evaluation similar to the one Sarah had faced years earlier at Camp Pendleton. 18-hour prone position, multiple targets at varying ranges, instructors applying maximum psychological pressure. Chen's tremor intensified under the stress, hands shaking so badly that the scope reticle danced across the target area in wild patterns. And then, exactly as Sarah had done during her own qualification, Chen stopped fighting it, stopped trying to force steady hands, and instead let the tremor guide her. The next shot, fired at 1,500 meters with tremor at maximum intensity, struck dead center. The observing instructor, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been part of Sarah's debriefing team years earlier, just shook his head in amazement. "I have been training snipers for 20 years, and I have never seen anyone make a shot like that with their hands shaking that badly." Sarah, watching from the observation tower, smiled. "Her hands were not shaking badly, Sergeant. They were shaking perfectly. She just learned to trust what her body was telling her." Rodriguez turned to Sarah. "You really believe this trait is an advantage and not a defect?" "I do not believe it, Sergeant. I know it. Because I used it to make a shot at 3,500 meters through triple glass barriers at a moving target. Because my father used it for 26 years until the Marine Corps destroyed him for refusing an immoral order. Because my grandfather used it in the Pacific and my great-grandfather before him. This is not a defect. It is evolution selecting for enhanced awareness. We just needed to stop treating it as weakness and start developing it as strength." 5 years after Devil's Canyon, the Ghost Protocol was integrated into standard Marine Corps sniper training. The program had identified over 200 Marines with the genetic trait and trained them to utilize it effectively. Marksmanship scores across the sniper community increased by an average of 18%. Extreme range capabilities improved dramatically. And most importantly, Marines who had been told their whole lives that they were somehow broken learned that they were actually gifted. Sarah Mitchell, now 32 years old and holding the rank of Master Sergeant, stood before a class of 20 new Ghost Protocol students at Quantico and looked at their trembling hands with understanding that came from lived experience. She thought about her father, now 75, and still visiting the program regularly to share his knowledge with the next generation. About Marcus Drake, released from prison and working to change federal whistleblower laws so that future soldiers would not have to choose between honor and survival. About the 23 people who had died in 1999 and whose deaths had finally been acknowledged and mourned properly. But most of all, she thought about the shot she had made on that Montana ridgeline. The impossible shot that had ended a siege and exposed a conspiracy and validated 3 generations of genetic legacy. The shot that had proved trembling hands could be steadier than iron when they learned to read truth through nervous system sensitivity. The new students sat before her with the mixture of hope and fear that came from being told your weakness might actually be strength. Sarah recognized that expression, had worn it herself during Scout Sniper School when Master Sergeant Garrett had questioned whether her tremor would cost lives under pressure, had seen it in her father's eyes when he talked about the 1999 decision that destroyed his career, had watched it transform into confidence when Jessica Chen made her first impossible shot and understood that her body had been telling her the truth all along. Students, Sarah began, her own hands resting on the podium with tremor visible for everyone to see. You are here because you have been flagged for a genetic trait that the Marine Corps has historically treated as a disqualification. Essential tremor, stress-induced tremor, familial tremor, different names for the same thing, which is a nervous system that processes environmental data faster than normal. That processing creates visible shake that instructors have interpreted as weakness or instability or lack of control. Sarah paused, letting the words settle. But you are not weak. You are not unstable. You are not out of control. You are carrying a genetic legacy that goes back generations, possibly centuries. A legacy that made your ancestors better hunters, better warriors, better survivors. The tremor is not failure of your nervous system. It is success. It is evolution. And I am here to teach you how to use it. Over the next 6 months, you will learn to read wind through your skin, to detect temperature changes before instruments register them, to feel atmospheric pressure shifts through tremor frequency. You will learn that what looks like shaking hands is actually your body speaking to you in a language you have not yet learned to understand. And when you master that language, you will make shots that other snipers cannot make, will survive in conditions that would defeat Marines who rely on instruments instead of instinct. Sarah held up her hands, letting the students see the tremor that had defined her life. These hands made a shot at 3,500 meters that military analysts said was impossible. These hands ended a 7-month siege. These hands vindicated my father, who was destroyed for doing the right thing. Not despite the tremor, because of it. When I stopped fighting what my body was telling me and started listening to it, impossible became merely difficult. That is what I am offering you. The chance to transform what the world calls weakness into what it actually is. Strength that most people will never understand or possess. The class began. Sarah taught them breathing techniques and sensory awareness exercises and the fundamental principle that Dr. Sarah Chen had discovered 40 years earlier. The tremor is data. Read it instead of suppressing it. Over the weeks that followed, 20 young Marines learned to trust shaking hands, learned to feel environments through nervous system sensitivity, learned that being different was not the same as being defective. And on a cold morning in late spring, Sarah's father visited the range to watch the new students demonstrate what they had learned. James Mitchell stood beside his daughter as 20 Marines with trembling hands made precision shots at extreme range, and his own hands shook with pride. "This is what I should have built," he said quietly. "If I had fought in 1999 instead of surrendering, if I had trusted that the truth would eventually win. This program, these students, the validation of our genetic legacy, this is what cowardice cost." Sarah put her hand on his shoulder. "You did build this, Dad, every choice you made led to this moment. You protected me when I was 6 years old. That protection allowed me to grow up and join the Marines. That service led me to Devil's Canyon, and Devil's Canyon led here. You did not fail. You planted seeds that took 27 years to grow, but they grew. Her father wiped tears from his weathered face. Your mother would be proud. Wherever she is, whatever she thinks of me, she would be proud of what you became. Sarah thought about the mother she had not seen since she was 6 years old, who had left because she could not forgive her husband for choosing family over conscience. She wondered if Margaret Mitchell had followed the news coverage of Devil's Canyon, had seen her daughter's name in reports about the siege ending. Wondered if somewhere out there, a woman in her 60s was watching her daughter validate the legacy her father had tried to protect. But that was a question for another day. Today was about 20 new Marines learning to trust their tremor, about a program that honored 3 generations of warriors who had been told they were broken, about a legacy that had survived discrimination and discharge and 27 years of disgrace to emerge stronger. The students finished their qualification exercise. All 20 passed. All 20 made shots that would have been impossible without proper training to utilize their genetic sensitivity. And as they secured their weapons and prepared for graduation, Jessica Chen approached Sarah with a question that brought everything full circle. Ma'am, what do I tell people when they ask about the shaking, when they see my hands and think there is something wrong with me? Sarah thought about a lifetime of hiding tremors, of being ashamed of genetic difference, of believing the world's assessment that she was somehow defective. Then she thought about her father standing tall at Arlington receiving the rank that had been stolen from him, about Marcus Drake surrendering after a shot that proved Mitchell hands could be trusted, about 20 Marines who would graduate today knowing they were gifted instead of flawed. You tell them the truth, Private Chen. You tell them that your hands shake because your nervous system processes environmental data faster than theirs. You tell them that what looks like weakness is actually strength that they will never possess. You tell them that you are a Ghost Protocol Marine carrying a genetic legacy that makes you one of the best precision marksmen the Corps has ever trained. And if they do not believe you, you show them, one impossible shot at a time. Chen smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had finally found permission to be proud of the thing that made her different. Thank you, ma'am, for teaching me to trust myself. Thank you, Sarah replied, for proving that the next generation is ready to carry this forward. As the sun set over Quantico that evening, Sarah stood on the same parade ground where her father had been stripped of rank 3 decades earlier and watched 20 new Ghost Protocol graduates receive their certifications. Her father stood beside her, trembling hands clasped together, watching his daughter teach others what he had learned too late in life to save his own career but early enough to save hers. Marcus Drake, released from prison and working to change laws that had destroyed good soldiers for following conscience, watched via video feed from his office in Washington, D.C., where he advocated daily for whistleblower protection and accountability. And somewhere in the archives at Naval Medical Research Center, Dr. Sarah Chen's research from 1987 was finally being declassified and published, 40 years after she had documented that trembling hands could read the wind better than any instrument ever built. The Ghost Protocol had begun with one woman refusing to take a shot that would have been easy but wrong. It had grown into a program that validated 3 generations of genetic legacy and ensured future generations would not face the discrimination that had destroyed careers and buried truth. But most importantly, it had proved something that James Mitchell had spent 27 years doubting, that choosing conscience over orders was not cowardice, that refusing to be complicit in cover-up was not failure, that sometimes the bravest thing a warrior could do was stand for truth even when institutions demanded comfortable lies. Sarah Mitchell, Master Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, stood at attention as the last Ghost Protocol student received her certification and understood that her father's sacrifice had not been in vain, that his choice to protect his 6-year-old daughter instead of fighting the system had created the possibility for that daughter to grow up and fight the battles he could not win. The tremor in her hands pulsed steady and sure, reading the evening wind, processing data her conscious mind would never fully understand, carrying forward a legacy that stretched back through Raphael and Thomas and James to ancestors whose names were lost but whose genetic gift remained. And she was proud of her hands, of her father, of the 20 Marines who would carry the Ghost Protocol forward, of making the choice her father had made and surviving it, of proving that truth could win if people were willing to pay the price. Her hands shook. They always would. And that was exactly how it should be. Because sometimes the steadiest hands are the ones that learn to shake at precisely the right frequency to read truth through the tremor. Sarah Mitchell's story got me thinking about the legacy fathers leave their children. Sometimes what we think is our greatest weakness turns out to be our most precious gift. What do you think about Sarah's decision, shooting to disable rather than kill Marcus Drake? Was she right to choose conscience over orders? And what matters more in the military, absolute obedience or having the courage to stand for truth? Share your thoughts below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more emotional military stories like this one. Thank you, veterans. Veterans for watching.